choose just to kind of, ignore and let it be, is a very delicate nuance in terms of the atmosphere in which we're being kind of hopefully raising Jewish children. It's a different discussion. And but the Gemara is talking about the idea that a father is physically disciplining his son, a Rabbi is physically disciplining his student. So let's say again, a father kills his son, a Rabbi kills his student. Ultimately, again, or Shliach Bezin. So this case is a little bit more understandable. Shliach Bezin is the right Bezin as he knows to malchus to someone. So again, remember, when we talk about this again, at this point, being at a court position, he determined how many malchus is actually what's there. So let's say any guy just died. So the halacha is because all of these are mitzvah activities, therefore halacha remains that there is no liability of gullus for when the person ends up killing someone like this. Okay, so what's this? So the point that Abba's trying to make is that the only time one is fighting gullus is if halacha remains that there are engaged in a non-mitzvah activity. Like the Akaida thing is really to kill someone when engaged in a mitzvah activity. Ultimately, again, there's no gullus for that. The second which is don't use it. So first case in Mishnah. First case in Mishnah was Ruben throws a stone into the slab and kills someone. So Mishnah says he goes to Dallas. What's his Dallas? That's the couple of things. Again, now when you mention this, what does that mean? So you throw a stone, capable of killing someone into a crowded public area. That's egregious. That's egregious. What are you talking about? I'm not sure that you talk. The source that's first love. Oh, no, that's the case. Nothing really referring to stone. Rather, it wasn't the case in Ruben's property is adjacent to which Sabbath. Ruben has a stone wall that he needs to demolish. As he's demolishing it, the stone falls into which Sabbath and kills Shimon, which the Gemara says still keep whatever you like. You gotta be careful. You gotta be careful. And also, what we're going to see, by the way, is in general, it's fascinating to see that on one hand, accidents happen. On the other hand, in the eyes of halacha, almost all accidents are absolutely preventable. Now, again, because there's another category of unpreventable circumstances, that's called onus. Shogeg, by definition, means absolutely, I do not intend to do anything, but had I been more vigilant, I could have prevented this. So again, obviously I'm not going to be liable, for the intentional act of bloodshed if it was an accident, but there's still liability. There's no couple of things. So again, if there was no fault for the accident, then why would you have to go to Dallas? Dallas is a kapara. Kapara doesn't necessarily what? If you did something, there's some level of liability. So the most of them, the fact that it's was it? Accident, that's fine, you're not amazing, but you're still responsible for accidents as well. So that's what the girl says, okay, I say, you need to get some instructing the law, but you should be more careful. So if you want to say, no, the social is supposed to be like that. You didn't see me at night. So what's the shop? She's assuming that at night there aren't people around. She's going to steal it. Well, I don't know by the way, you got to be careful at the end of Islam. Just because it's at night, why does that give you a pass? So it's placed on the ashbah. So it's the base. Ruben is demolishing his wall, and he's kind of like demolishing it into a garbage dump. Right? Okay, so that's white line. Hi, ashbah. He's not used to it. He's the ashbah. So much. If you have people coming in the dump, which don't, I don't know, most budget for the activity, if you have people in the garbage dump, so then the mice start getting lots of functionality. So that's negligence. Emotionally, but if people never come to the garbage dump,
that's incredible. Do you at least give him like an angry hand job or anything like that?
So it's a very clear point. Actually, you begin to see these three very interesting categories, right? This means intentionality, there's shogeg, there's accident, but I should have been more careful and could have prevented it. And then there's onus, which is I had no way, there was no way for me to prevent this. So again, it's a garbage dump that people don't know what to do. So Ruben's just demolishing his work. The garbage dump. It means you can expect anybody to be there. That's called the onus. And the couple is people have the ashbah ha'asiyah you punish by Laila. Shim Asui be punished by Bayel. So this is very interesting. So what are you talking about? I also know sometimes people would do a garbage dump also of the public restroom. So we're talking about over here, that's why you have to be careful of people in the garbage dump. So what's the case? The case is where people use this as a, or people use this garbage dump as a restroom. Like for ultimately again at night, I like they also don't use it by day. The eat the liquid yes, but sometimes people use it by day. In other words, it's primarily used by night by people, not even used by day, but every once in a while somebody will use it by day. Therefore, you know what's happening over here. You're going to be constructing this wall of those garbage dump. Hoshea Lohavi, and he's doing it by day. Hoshea Lohavi, Asuri Punishment. So again, on one hand, he's not a Hoshea, he's not a which is why he's here every way to assume that people won't really be there by day. On the other hand, only Sinani Lohavi, he's also not going to be only why isn't he always? That he could manipulate the lesson. Because every once in a while, people do come there by day. So this would be an interesting case of showbiz. Right? Showbiz, so he's obviously not intentional because he's doing it by day where people aren't normally there. However, it's also not always because again, people do come there by day. So if you're not amazing and you're not always, what are you? Showbiz. Showbiz. Okay, that's the case. So let's read that. So the last, let's read that. And the coast is clear. So actually goes ahead and the closest stones Shimon sticks his head out. So ultimately again it wasn't that per se moving his puzzle. Here's the puzzle. What's the logic? What's the level, right? In Matzah, try to pronunciate Shimon. So what's the Russian of the concept is Matzah. Right, Umatza Esrei. So that's what Esrei means, right? So really, this is like the spiritual world. Spiritual world finds a shame. That comes to explain the case where Shimon makes himself a bigger Golfika. In other words, so the nice in this case over here, Shimon stuck his head out of the window, put himself in the direction, right, in the path of the projectile. So therefore, again, maybe it's not going to be tied, but it's not going to be. In other words, we're not going to finish the exercise when you go, what's the other special to keep the hunter. Therefore, again, if they're moving through the stone, there was no one there. Right? And then Shimon afterwards, after he didn't release the stone, Shimon stuck his head out of his window, thereby putting his head in the direction of the projectile. Ultimately, again, moving is going to be object. The main law, the Matzah is Kalamashma. So let's just say, this is saying that Matzah, the Russian of Matzah means something was there already before. Right, there's like a pre-existing condition. Is that true? Well, let me read that for a second. The Matzah, back in the Matzah, shall know that any part of that moment is used over color. The Ra, you use over Yapa. So what does that mean? That's the Afusa. But that's the Afusa. The first time is ancestral land. So in general, if you sell off your ancestral land, you can force the purchaser to sell it back. That since it's part of your ancestral portion. However, again, the halacha is only so if you sold your ancestral land as like a last resort. Like you had nothing else to sell. But if let's say you had other property, but you still sold your ancestral land, you can't force the seller, the purchaser, to sell it back to you. So if Matzah, Matzah, this comes to do something like other properties, but you come up and the Ra, you use over Yata, and the Yata often may know become the Hasan. So let's listen to this Matzah. Means different things based on context. For example, Hasan may know is the Matzah thing is to be Sika Yaga. So therefore, if I stay at Pizza, so again, the Matzah is compatible ultimately again to be Sika Yaga, that it comes into new memory. Not Sika Yaga, just like again, the Sika Yaga means she came into new memory now. Matzah is only a how come in one of the qualities? You know, so Matzah is in accordance to context. The Matzah didn't do Yahar. The Matzah is like the forest. So now Yahar need to do something. Just like the Yahar, right? The forest is a pre-existing Yahar. Matzah now need to do something. So for here, in order for Reuben to be punished for killing Shimon accidentally, what has to happen? Shimon, so to speak, has to be present at the time that we don't give his activity. At the time that we don't give his thing, for example, this case, through the rock, Shimon was not present. and she introduces herself into the equation after you've already through the rock, there will not be liability for Dallas in that case. Okay, then Hazor is having. Hazor is having. So you mention like this. Over and over. Nimai, Katavas 18 directions. So let's just remember again. The ending of the scroll is as follows. The English can spoke about this idea. Abashar said that the only kind of revival for Dallas is when you are engaging what we call a Messiah, and we're called a non-mitzvah driven. But if you are engaged in a mitzvah driven, you're moving a lot to right, and you end up turning out to let me say it under. So the word says, and again, you know that shows on the show. That shows because the Pasuk says, remember again, the Pasuk is about Shem Yavo, and for they are locked on it. Like even was into the chop.
This is incredible. Now, let me catch you guys up to the Sam Hunter situation here. We're going to rewind about 5, 6 months ago on this show. I called Sam Hunter out of the bucket, and I pulled a man named Trey out of the bucket. That day, they weighed 335 pounds. Sam Hunter gets Trey out of 396 pounds. I bring them both on stage to join each other at the same time. That episode, just to see what it would be like, to see if the stage would actually handle it. And then once they were feeling a little bit ready to go, I said, why don't we do a thing where for the whole month of October, you guys try to lose weight, come back in 4 or 5 weeks, we'll weigh you guys in again. And for every time you lose, we'll bring you $10 for to see what's happening.
And even though it's a mitzvah, it also says you go to Dallas. To which the Gemara says, I'm going to keep them in much effective. Innocent, they love mitzvah, personally love mitzvah. But that's kind of an example, I'll tell you why. It was like, there is no mitzvah to chop down the wood for a sukkah. Stop. Right? There is no mitzvah to chop wood for his back. Meanwhile, I was going to for example, there's a pile of wood. Let's say the pile of stuff. Right? Is there a mitzvah to chop down your own stuff? Let's say you find a pile of wood for his back. Is there a mitzvah to chop down wood for his back? So there's a mitzvah to have stuff. Like there's a mitzvah to have wood. He's still missing some chapter points. Even the technically speaking, you weren't going to have a chapter in front of you down for stuff. I'm not going to say that's still called an optional act. And you will not be hired. You will not be hired outside. And you will not be part of the development. Asian will be in the level. Not Sahar, Hamakis, Nova Disorders, Community of the Office, Citizens. So what about the people like this one? Discipline is trying. We have to place. I love this discipline is being actually because she had that vision was flogging someone after him because the Potter. Well, why don't we say, how does he know this? Meanwhile, even the Dama locked this stuff, Ash didn't have to lock this stuff. Why is there this real quick piece of pocket? You know what? It used to this. He's technically speaking, if the son was well behaved, his father would need to discipline him. Right? And therefore, I'm not going to say that. So maybe therefore the act of disciplining as well should be happening. So what we know is it's just like this. The same way, like let's say, for example, by the Buddha as well as there. So there's not a mutual chop wood. What's the mitzvah? What's the mitzvah? To like chop wood. You're going to say chop wood, right? If I have wood, I don't chop wood. So it's like this. There's no mitzvah to discipline a child. What's the mitzvah? What's the obligation of a parent? To have a disciplined child. Like that's not an obligation of a parent. You have a child who has proper discipline. It's just one. If you're not disciplined, then a parent has to discipline them. So maybe you should say that the act of discipline isn't really a mitzvah. But the actual mitzvah, same way that the act of cutting down wood for a sukkah is not a mitzvah. But I mean, it's just if there's no cut spot, I have to cut down wood. But the cutting of the staff is not for a mitzvah. So again, the obligation of the parent is to have a disciplined child. That's the mitzvah. It's just if my child is not disciplined, so I have to do the work. So if I do the same thing, so if I have to praise the showing you for discipline, you shouldn't go to Dallas. I'm sorry, you shouldn't be presenting Dallas. To which the Gemara says, also, this is very interesting. How about that warrior mitzvah? Even if the son is disciplined, it's fascinating. It is still an obligation of a father to follow discipline. It's Yisra Banecha B'Yodecha, V'Yikrim Andono L'Nafshecha, which literally means again, discipline your son and educate him, and you will provide the right to yourself. So this is actually very interesting. So the most is indicating over here that even if the child is well behaved, there is still an element of parental discipline that is absolutely necessary in order to maintain the child's proper path in life. Very interesting. Listen, so just in general, just as an aside, it's fascinating about this is, one of the things sometimes that we're so scared about today, parent children, right? Even if you parent children well, there's just like every parent says, the brother says, no, my kids are involved with that. The girlfriend tells me that. Because every single thing that you want is like, love you, respect. It's not true. It's not true. Not disciplining your child is a stricken with parental responsibility. Allowing my child to do whatever they want is an abdication of parental responsibility. The children do not need them to be a friend. How about if you have enough friends? We're going to have one parent. Two parents. One father, one mother. That's what they have. The job of the parent ultimately are going to provide structure, to provide hadiachot, and ultimately to provide discipline. And the parent who fails to do that ultimately is shaping the responsibility. You said that have a so even if the child is well behaved, the Gemara says, there still has to be an element of parental discipline that is present. It's fascinating. Rabbi, gladness to be the Amish. So Rabbi says, Allah comes over and says, forget what I just said. Let's go a different approach. He says, Ba'ashay never asri every ba'yasa. Not right across the same. As it talks about again, they're really comes in contact, ultimately they're very chilling in the forest. My I have the equal walk. So again, the forest represents the opposite. You want to come in, you don't want to come in. He's not that from mitzvah, he's talking about a mitzvah. How can you say that ultimately, again, you have the right to choose if you come in or you don't come in? So you can't do the evidence of the word Asher. Asher always means something optional. You would share with love, and then you start talking. So what's the next thing is talking about a person who becomes tummy. It doesn't become tahar, and enters into the base on the state of tumah. Such a person is high praise. So I have a use version of Asher. So when you say, Ibai Mikwa, I'm talking about a case of a person who had a choice whether to become tummy. What about the Yazim Mitzvah? What about these mitzvahs? The Lord said, people don't. No, how can I get about that? So what's when I get to this mitzvah? I didn't say that the Pasuk says Hashem. So maybe Hashem is like this. Only in the case where you have a choice to become tummy. Naturally, everything that is an interest in place. But if you do have a choice to become tummy, only everything is in the flesh. It's there for me. Not quite close. So for example, when you're teaching this mitzvah, or works on this mitzvah, you have a choice. You have to take care of it. It's this sense. Would you say that therefore because I didn't have a choice, I had to do it? Therefore, I also is an interest in the state of Tuna, not shy colors. That's not true. It's simply not true. Shining out from the other class, versus in the other. It says on the days, Tame to Yudia, Yukama. Now, because the other part is Tame Yudia. So you told me indicates that however you became Tame, whether you became Tame in an actual way, or you became Tame in a non-actual way, Allah for the Messiah, if you enter into the Mikdash in that state of Tuma, you are high hearts. Which the word is, when you write it, if you're saying, no, Tame Yudia is usually for something different. What does that teach me? So if you're saying Tame Yudia, you're not able to go young. So what's the right interesting? Tame Yudia, after you use full of who's full young, and when 3 years is begun, there's Tame, what did he do? There's things in what? Out of church, right? That guy goes into this unfortunate state of Tuma, he's also high price. So our fact that he used to full young is not high price. The Rabbi says, Tame Yudia. As long as your Tuma is a Tame in some way, shape, or form, then you go for this really Tuma high price. So the Rabbi says, Tuma so full, we're not looking for superfood. And Tuma so low comes to include ultimately in the physical someone who is someone like maybe even parallel church, but it's not missing his requisite kabbalos to the parish. However, he's given us the law. So let's say I just have different approaches to this conversation. Listen to this. Then the says, the parish of a concert is supposed to be one of the things. The concept of the year. The parish of a concert is supposed is like this. Sheesh is going to pass. Listen to this. Sheesh is going to pass. For 1601, but the young has sheep to suppose the parish of a concert is supposed on the 7th of Yishalas. The parish really plowing. Katsir harvesting Tishbos, Yishalas. As I said, we're going to see over here. It sounds like it's talking about Shabbos, but it doesn't make sense that it's talking about Shabbos. So we already know the reference to Shabbos. So let's have also interestingly enough, if you might think we were talking about Shmita. Shmita, okay, so listen to this. So how should it cover this one? So the Kiva says, Eden say that our college says she is, because this says she is. One reason going to Shmita, I don't need the person to teach me that I can't plow and I can't harvest in Shmita. I already know this. So by man I sight from the Sizra, the kind of from the Sizra. The consequently says, really don't plow this look and don't see the video. So the problem is going to Allahu Harish Shaf Shmias. Shmias the Shmias. The concert shall see Shmias on the Shmias. Rather, what is it going to include? It's going to include the crowning of the 6th year. That benefits the 7th year. Or things that go during the 7th year and ultimately mature during the 8th year. But those items have an element of Shmias sanctity as well. So the Shmias says not Harish the Shmias, I'll cut the Shmias. And the Shmias says, well, come to teach like this. Come to teach you that I just as plowing is an actual act. So the harvesting is an actual act. Not when are these publishers. Yatzah Kitzir HaOmer Shem Mitzvah. What does this context do? This comes to the harvesting of the owner, which is not an actual act, rather is a mitzvah. I remember Rabbi. I remind the Harish delicious. I remember talking about plowing of delicious.
So goddamn amazing.
Harishas Mitzvah. Harishas Omer. It is talking about the Messiah, but it's done in order to the owner. That's and the father feels the third party, the owner. Which is mitzvah. And even said about you walking on the Rahman, it's supposed. And even say the Torah says, stick into that. Stick into that. And when they gave him the Matzah Kodesh in the Kodesh, he has mitzvah. So you know, because after all, there was like, there was no mitzvah to plowing, right? Because if you already found the plowed field, don't think you have to plow a different field ultimately for the owner, right? So it's really you have to have an office, but not all of it, it's supposed to see conditions you have post to the other different approach. So we don't supposed to have another power to finish the side. So the father is disciplining each other, it kills him off disciplining, already disciplining students, it kills him off disciplining, or she has to his father, someone kills him. So what's how the pocket is on the spot because it's a mitzvah. That nice. They must be going to eat from the mitzvah. Hashanani Labi mitzvah. Why don't they say it over here? Since it's the son of discipline, the student of discipline, the person of the discipline, that I'm not coming to get no reason to do these things. We even now, it's not called a mitzvah. So it's not to be anyway. Hassan, Hashanani Labi mitzvah. Hassan, Habadat, the first one like Hassan, Habadat, the young man mitzvah coming. Like, piece of discipline. Even if the child is disciplined, even if the student is disciplined, there is still a mitzvah for the discipline that says, Yisra Baruch Abiyah Kaka. Okay, here's the Gemara. It says, Hada Amalava, La Nasibi Zahamu, Sira Kumi Bekarisha. So it says, so ultimately, as you love as it was, and let's read this about what you said before. The Gemara is comparing the harvest thing to the father. Harisha, that's a Harish, inner Harish. Just like that Harisha, was that he found the plowed fields. You don't have to plow again. You don't have to plow it over. I said, you can't. So that's it. I need to plant, obviously. I need to plant body for the cover. I already found the field that is plowed. So you have to make stuff to go out there to plow another field to the same over. I'm going to put up Sireniani, Akizionali Matsakatsu, Inakote, so it's an American also, but I'm not going to say for every five Kakbari, I don't have to have this more Bari. These are like the Mitzvah, Matsakatsu, Inakote, Mitzvah. It's more depends on, by the way, that's actually interesting enough when it comes to the Kabbalah Omer, by Chalisha, by time, if you only found the cloud feeling, there is no respect. Wow, again, for the sake of hurting body from them. But let's say for the tzira, let's say for the harvest, if you found hot body, right, can you use that for the Omer? The answer is no. Right, rather what? In order for the Yosef to use the Omer, you have to actually what? You have to actually fight with that body. So let's say, as you're going to have to do this, so you're going to come Omer. Come up, third day of the Omer, third day of tzira. So you think that it just comes in, you're like, yes, Omer, this is a side. Yes, Omer. And the two people were sons of Ayom, Shloshim, La Omer, and Ba Omer. Right? So what's the method? Yes? So when it is done the Mensa, La Omer goes, means that you are helping independent of carbon was off. Ayom, Shloshim, La Omer means today is the third day since the carbon Omer was offered. Ba Omer reflects the idea that there is not yet a carbon Omer. So therefore, again, Ba Omer means not from the carbon Omer, but it means counting of the days of the Omer. That's how it's interesting that the majority of the things actually say it temporarily. One should say Ba Omer and not La Omer. The only say La Omer is there is an actual carbon Omer. That's correct. Otherwise, if there's no carbon Omer, I'm not counting from the carbon Omer, I'm counting Ba Omer. Right here. So this is an observation. That's like this yesterday. So I'm just going to come out. So the Rabbi actually has this opinion. I don't know if there's a unit that maybe from Scottish right? To actually say both. Can't say both. But actually, when time you say Ayom Shloshim and Ba Omer, and then afterwards you say Ayom Shloshim and La Omer. There's nothing wrong with saying both. Everyone is saying both. And as therefore, again, you get both of these things. But it's just, you know, I don't know if I'm going to because I'm not saying that. Anyway, so this is not, you know, even though, so for our purposes, by the way, so like I say, so over a good picture, I want to mention if you were to find body that would not satisfy the obligation, you would have to go ahead and restart the new body for the sake of carbon. Okay, what's that? That is my hour, take the finish the short, I'll give it to the short. We got Kalopin myself. I love it, you already actually see you did not get so into it, but at the end of the day, two important things. Number one, different dollars, if you kill someone, when you do what we call an optional discretionary act. But one is engaged in a nice mitzvah, and that results in the accidental death from someone to someone who is ignored God. So therefore, if a father is disciplining his child, again, the plan was exactly, it would be very difficult, or Rabbi is disciplining his students, or it's what the baby is. Like Jason is the minister of punishment, and like when shepherds have killed someone, they represent the mitzvah act, one does not go to doubles for those acts. You only go to doubles in case of an actual discretionary act. That's number one. The before that we might be really spending that much time with it, it is a lot less than any doubles to both parties, that is the victim and the like to be where he is. But if ultimately, let's say I get shooting is trespassing, or Ruben's copying, Ruben's practicing archery, like when Ruben's throwing shooting, then I'm not going to mention there's no key of doubles over that, because shooting has no right to do that. Alright, let's go ready about the Mishnah. Go to IUDI, stop in, go to IUDI. So we'll define exactly what this means. But really, again, a father is exiled as a result of killing his son, and a son is exiled as a result of killing his father. Okay, like I said, what the Hashem's means is a father kills his son b'shodei, or a son kills his father b'shodei. Everyone is sent to Dallas as a result of killing the Jew. Like that's perhaps when the son going out with their head. And then do the exile, wherever it goes, towards the Ger Kosher, with the exception of the Ger Kosher. The Ger Kosher in a brother, all you do Ger Kosher. And the Ger Kosher is only exiled as a result of another Ger Kosher. We'll have to see exactly what this is. Remember again, the Ger Kosher is a non-Jew who lives in Eretz Yisrael, who repudiates idolatry, and he goes down to the church, Shemitah has been in there. Says the Gemara. So what's that mean? He's telling me that if a father kills his son, they don't feel the way he goes there. And we just learned. And we just learned that Lamaisim, where his biggest Mishnah. He tells me if a father is disciplining his kid, and ends up killing him in the midst of discipline, you get Allah Thomas, the father doesn't go to Goss. To which the Gemara says, really, as the government. What are we talking about? A well-behaved child. Well-behaved child, very disciplined, very disciplined, and therefore the father had no need to discipline. But we said before that even if the son is disciplined, it's still a mitzvah for the father to show you discipline. It shouldn't have been a father. What are we talking about? We're talking about us would be a little carpenter's apprentice. But the case over here, is ultimately again where the father is teaching his son carpentry. The son is not paying attention. The father is disciplining him in order to learn to pay attention. And he is killing the son accidentally. That would be the case in Venice. Teaching us a trade, and that is usually they're not teaching his son a trade. Right? They're teaching his son a finance. Right? And the Gemara says, usually, start with the Monday. Let's say a father has an obligation to teach his son a trade, much in the same way a father has an obligation to teach his son Torah. Look at Rashi. Rashi says that usually, you have to have a mitzvah of Amulam, you have a mikra, paradigm of the condition, because of Ra, Chaim, Isha, Sha'afta, Hikish, and this, Shu, Isha, to the truth, specifically the notion. So it's an Isha, the word actions, and the same way that a father has an obligation to marry his son off. By the way, marry his son off doesn't just mean marry his son off. It means that a father has an obligation to teach his son how to be a proper husband, and how to maintain a proper marriage, how to maintain a proper home. It's not just trying to sit it. Model the right behaviors as to how to be a proper Jewish husband. So to again, a father has an obligation to teach his son a parnasa. So therefore, again, so you might say again, if a father is teaching his son a parnasa, and is disciplining him, so he pays attention and accidentally kills him, the father should actually cover the performance of a mitzvah, and she went to them others. The governor in Masya is no, so the son already had another trade. But as I still say, father teaching him, therefore, they already knew what he needed to know in order to maintain himself in life. Father's teaching him an additional trade. Additional trade, okay, you know, if you have a client, right, of what's going to be, what if you teach him an additional trade? You know what's hard to teach his son in life? Right? How to have a plan B. What's the one of the most important slogans in life? Is learn how to pivot. Because we're all kind of like, things don't go the way you plan. And let's say there are two different kinds of people that are in this thing called public. There are people who fall apart, and people who don't have any play, and people who learn how to help them. One of the most important things when we teach our children is how to pivot. That's why we're listening. Like, you're not going to teach them moments in life, but most people, most of the people in moments, make moments of feel for our children is how we deal with stressful situations. Our children learn so much about us and about life and how we deal with stress. And when our children see us fall apart, when our children see us lose it, or our children see us lash out in stressful situations, that's how they truly deal with stress as well. So if my child sees me under stressful situations, under pressure, I got this. I got this. I'm inside. I don't got this, right? I do not have this. I don't have any control over this situation. I don't know what to do. But I know that I'm going to keep a cool head. I'm going to be measured. I'm going to be sharper. I'm going to be measured. I'm going to be even healed. I'm going to figure this out. That is the most tremendous thing we do to our children. So therefore, what's interesting enough, the father and pastor over here, maybe try to say his father also. But this father also understands that in life, he's going to teach you to the plan B. An active plan B, and also again in general, how to deal with life when things don't go according to plan. But because it's a plan B, therefore it's not a mitzvah. Because it's a mitzvah, therefore the father ends up accidentally killing his son in the midst of teaching him this second day. I don't know, so I look for Rabbi said, yeah, he's going to go to the stuff. There was one stuff for today. Tremendous shkoyach on the dot. Shkoyach on a good night. Genius mind. Everyone's in. Have a great day. Good night, everyone.
I was fully under anesthesia. It scared me a little bit because we were literally. Does somebody want to shut the fuck up? I'm having the fucking set of my life. There is a young lady yelling from the audience. One of these Austin girls with a Gary Clark Jr. hat. Everyone trying to fit in. Everybody goes to the same hat shop on Congress and thinks they're original. I love it. I mean, you're really going to have to shut the fuck up. We're trying to have fun up here. Then you really fucking derail it. Really derailed it. Yell, young lady. Come on, let us know. Yell it again. It's okay. Don't be. Do you have your organs? Do I have my organs?
All right, so they'll say, good night, such a special Hashem.
Hold on, she's with a little Mexican boy that's about to yell something right now. This guy's in way over his head. This woman is Russian. She thought when you got put out, they stole your organs. Awesome. Just gonna get someone, get her out of here. Someone get her out of here now. I got a bad lead. Seriously, if you could only see me throughout this past week, it was nightmares. You're gonna get out of the bed. Don't scare the guests, William. Don't scare. Don't look right in her eyes like that. Deeply unhappy you are. I want these people to tell their friends good things about the show. I don't want to know her to go back to the Austin comedians and say there's a guy with an unlicensed gun that's having a bad week over in Kill Tony. Ariel, have you seen William before? Do you know the type of monstrosity that we're dealing with here? This guy was built in a comedic laboratory. I know. I mean, I honestly, like, my favorite Austin pastime is talking to crazy homeless people anyway, so this is fine. Yeah, there's a couple really good bridges here. What are your favorite bridges? Can you name some of the streets where the bridges are near? There's one on South Congress, 18th. Oh, okay. Okay, there's definitely not a bridge there.
We have something short, right? 23
Most likely,
days.
I do believe before Congress, if my local geography doesn't.
And it's actually like, there's something just very exciting about it. You know, like,
Anybody confirm this?
massive undertaking. Massive undertaking. But when things put in tremendous beauty revelation, but there was like,
lower numbers, William.
really sexual. Just so sweet and so beautiful. It's really opening scene, maybe we don't some of us in our youth. And that's actually back on. I don't know, this was some that came back. This trigger, right? Recommendation of this. How did it I'm not sure. I'm not sure. One question. I mean, it's just going to I think it's special welcome. Try to welcome, a lot of new people. Learn how to just the 40 new people who joined the shiur for a month. It's not the in-person shiur. Baruch Hashem, and people who are not doing that. That's not committed for a chance. Or you have to just do it like this. It's always how it starts. But special up for the morning, Baruch Hashem is Justin. Baruch Hashem, beautiful to have Rob. I don't recognize the people that have been in this session. I love that. Let us begin. So, begin by thanking all of our sponsors. First, thank you to Ari, making sure that you have peace and coffee. That doesn't get like this. It's like all your young coffee, so tremendous respect. Thank you for that. Thank you to all of our sponsors for this morning's shiur. I'm your for the sponsor, for Caption Pay, the first in the Shpaka. We are giving all the strange rushes this year as it's a test for the sales to us and this way. We come very sponsor for the one Kamisa, Abari, we told our whole product. In establishment of this identity is like country is done faster. We work with grandson to even Jeremiah. Opening efforts in the order. Not in the Samuel Friendship in the schools. A sequence for all of our children and recent to be the month of the English in all the parties. And then you have his mother, Sarah, and then the Basio, Shira, Esher, Sophron, and let's get back to let us begin. So it's a beautiful guy. Out of us, the other, of course, is always related to going in this place. All of our hostages left. response to Shimon and home, the Shalom and the Khalif, and we have to discuss about how these soldiers may be successful, the whole Maaseh with also to all of our highlighters was beautiful. Like I say, I woke up this morning to a whole bunch of pictures, people laying down in different places that they are really pretty. But this is a shot, it's not I don't think it's a show right now, I'm trying to get permission. That's really beautiful. It's really beautiful and really inspiring. It's tremendous. I think those of us who have been doing that for a while recognize that it's so much more than just learning. It's that it becomes an indispensable part of your day. It doesn't matter where you're at. It doesn't matter where you're from, right? Just since I got a picture for a from Randy Ocean, Wesley Ocean, right? Yosef and Josh was doing their experience, going through everything. They're going countries with success, but what's happening? So someone knows that we're back, and this was that good. So nice that we're learning together and just beautiful, just inspiring. There's no such a great. There's no day off. To figure out, and that's how the beauty of the doc just presents. I remember other pictures as well. It's beautiful to see people learning to actually all different places. And to be in there. Let's look at us the Electra Mishnah on Zayin Dal 7a up to Mishnah. Mishnah Midmar Dina Ubach. Interesting case over there. Let's say someone was, so you have Reuben Shimon, right? And now fast forwarding a little bit, right? Because Reuben has been judged by Beis Din and found guilty. And then what happens? Reuben runs away, he escapes. He escapes before they're able to execute him. Now let's say again Reuben is brought back. So Reuben is recaptured and he's brought back into that Beis Din. He's brought back into that Beis Din. So what happens? In social we don't retry him. In other words, let's say as much what does this mean we don't retry him? That Rashi says over here, Laksa V'Lisa V'Litim in other words, we don't retry him to see maybe we'll find some way to exonerate him. Now, why does the Mishnah need to say this? First, another going back to our Sanhedrin days, in general, with capital cases. What does we try to do in all capital cases? What do we try to do? Exonerate, right? That's what we're trying to do. We try not to execute people, and we'll do whatever we can to try to find someone innocent. So I might have thought that if Reuben was sentenced to death, but escaped before the sentence was carried out, that perhaps when he's hauled back in front of the Beis Din, maybe we should retry him. Commercial English says no, we don't do that. We don't do that. If he's brought back in front of the Beis Din, we don't go and retry him. Kamakom Shiyam, again, we'll visit that a little bit more in the Gemara. Kamakom Shiyam Dishnav Yehudim Amish Pony Shemima in the Beis Din Shalom Ukloni Edav Harizei Hamid. Similarly, let's say again, witnesses shot in Beis Din. Witnesses say, we are here to testify that Reuben was tried in front of so-and-so Beis Din. So-and-so were his witnesses, and he was convicted. So Beis Din to execute his testimony. So this is a case that is the case. Right, and now this Beis Din is receiving testimony from the witnesses who know that Reuben was tried in front of a particular Beis Din. So-and-so and his witnesses. Therefore, they'll be executed before that. Sanhedrin, I guess, bars or the fruits of lives. So this is fascinating. So literally translated, the Sanhedrin operates in Eretz Yisrael and outside of Eretz Yisrael. Now, what does this mean? We'll see the Rambam when we get to the Sugya. But again, the idea over here is when the Sanhedrin is operating in Eretz Yisrael, it has the ability to implement its rulings outside of Eretz Yisrael as well. It's obviously there's no Sanhedrin outside of Eretz Yisrael. Sanhedrin only resides in Eretz Yisrael itself. But when the Sanhedrin is operational in Eretz Yisrael, its rulings could be enforced outside of Eretz Yisrael as well. The Gemara says, so this is the famous Gemara, Sanhedrin ha'alegis echad b'shavua yutis chodronis. The Sanhedrin will execute a person once every 7 years. For 7 years is called the destroyer. Alright? And Rabbi Azariah on that, after the Shivim Shana, Rabbi Azariah says, no, even one shall be 70 years. So this is interesting enough, back to that previous notion, Beis Din does not like to execute. And therefore, again, Tanakama says that the Beis Din kills once every 7 years, that's not good. That's a bad track record for a Beis Din. It's called the destroyer Beis Din. But Rabbi Azariah, even once every 7 years, you also How beautiful is it? And those are Isaiah. Those are Isaiah and the Harim to Ben Shivim Shana. There's a piece of Shikam in China, Relos, Atadasha Ben Zoma. So listen, the beautiful thing about Kedusha is that when you go out and you wrap yourself in Kedusha powers, you have the Kedusha of the Savior, and Kedusha of the Savior, right? I'm like 7 years old, but he wasn't 7 years old, and now he's kind of old, so after 2 nights late, and so after Baruch Hashem, after spelling, after 3 years of Yom Tov, first thing for him, who shows up? Who shows up when you open the door? Who shows up when you open the door? That's the topic Kedusha. The more you immerse yourself in it, you develop yourself in it, it follows you wherever you go. So as a guy, 77 years, not good. I'm talking about the people, I'm talking about the people saying, in the Hayuniverse, headroom, when we're not up on the Olam. So this is fascinating. When we're talking about the people saying that we sat on the Sanhedrin, no one would ever be executed. We're going to see what that means. And we should go real moment after we might be sure to go in Israel. So no one says, that's not a good thing. That's not a good thing. Because if no one gets executed, or if no one is ever executed, no one ever put to death for murder, then in general, you gain a general sense of awarenessness. So obviously, what Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Karpa were trying to say was that, we would find ways to exonerate everyone. What the Jim and you were saying is, that sounds very beautiful and honest and that's not good. It's not good. They does have to execute because at the end of the day, there are capital cases. And if the capital punishment is never carried out, then that creates a certain sense of societal lawlessness. Okay, more about that in the Gemara. So, there's also ways in the days yesterday, how to make days and after social. So, let's remember again. The first part of the Mishnah, right? So what was the first part of the Mishnah? Ruvain was convicted of murder. Sentenced to death. Then what occurs? Ruvain escapes. So the Mishnah says if he's brought back in terms of the same thing, we don't retry his case. When no digest in his heart, what you see from there, it's only because he's being brought back where? In front of the same base thing. But I can recall from that if he was brought in front of the second base, a different base thing, then maybe we wouldn't retry this case. How Tony said, come up and Shiam describe you only even under Tishponi. Shamigma Dina Basin, Related Pony, Pony Uda, Harim So what's happening? If you look at the evidence, what does the evidence say? That if witnesses show up and witnesses say, we testify that Ruben was tried in so-and-so basin. So-and-so was witnesses, and he was found guilty, but he executed, which makes it sound like what? Even if he's brought in front of another basin, we don't retry his case. In other words, what it sounds like, was a little contradiction from the first part of the Mishnah. It sounds like the reason why you don't re-examine Ruben's case is because he's being brought back in front of the same basin. I can infer from that he would be brought in front of a different basin, we wouldn't really look at his case. But then if you look at the end of the Mishnah seems to indicate that if witnesses show up and say, we testified that Ruben was found guilty in a different basin, we will execute Ruben based on that, and we will not retry his case. So what's going on here? It's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. And when I go Kasha, Kanda Yisrael, Kanda Yisrael. Let's say two different pieces. One is talking about Eretz Yisrael, and one is talking about Chutzlaretz. What is that? The sign that was a real video. So we really going to start on the Shem Shepha. Bara, with Utsa La'aretz La'aretz, a certain as Dina. Right? So you know it's like this. If a person, sorry, Bara, La'aretz the Chutzlaretz. The person runs away, and then he starts to Chutzlaretz. We do not retry this case. Here's the case. Ruben was convicted of murder. Right? Ruben was convicted of murder. So he's convicted of murder in the days when he went to Israel. And then what happens? He escapes with Chutzlaretz. So again, in that case, when the witness show up in front of the basin with Chutzlaretz, and they say, we testify that Ruben was convicted in so-and-so basin, so you put out this and will not retry his case. Retry his case. However, listen to this. So if you go ahead and you escapes from Chutzlaretz to Israel, you will retry this case. Why? L'Espírito shall Eretz Yisrael. He goes out of the second of Eretz Yisrael. And I say how first I was going to point out how beautiful it is. Right? So before you so this is really an incredible idea. Yeah. So the word says there are times that you will read Roman a capital case and times when you won't. What's the criteria? If Reuben was tried and found guilty in Eretz Yisrael and then escapes the Chutz La'aretz, and witnesses come in front of the Beis Din in Chutz La'aretz, and they say, and you testify that Reuben was found guilty in a Beis Din in Eretz Yisrael, this so-and-so Beis Din, so-and-so was witnesses, Beis Din will carry out the execution. Now, again, we'll discuss when a Beis Din in Chutz La'aretz can execute someone. We'll talk about that. But the Maisa, they won't retry the case. However, if Reuben is found guilty in Chutz La'aretz and then escapes Eretz Yisrael, even if witnesses show up and they say, he's testified that Reuben was convicted of murder and sentenced to death. What's La'aretz? We will look at the case when we try it. Eretz Yisrael, why? Discuss it Eretz Yisrael. Discuss it Eretz Yisrael. What is it? Besides such a beautiful overwhelming Gemara, just about literally the Kedusha, the holiness and the stress. It's interesting. We speak a lot about the holiness of the land. This is different. This is just a Kusa Shal Eretz Yisrael. This is a Kusa Shal Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael makes us better people. That's when it comes to Eretz Yisrael, is a better person. So therefore, again, Reuben, the murderer, who escaped from Kufa to Eretz Yisrael, we have not reviewed enough to really look at this case. Why? Because Reuben of Eretz Yisrael is a different person than Reuben of Chutz La'aretz. And therefore, again, Reuben of Eretz Yisrael deserves another look at his case. Conversely, Reuben of Eretz Yisrael is convicted and lost Chutz La'aretz. Then we go second. Second place. Reuben of Chutz La'aretz is Eretz Yisrael. It's a Kusa. It's a different man. Because he's a different man, therefore, again, his case has to be reviewed. Now, let's just want to point out how beautiful this is when Eretz Yisrael do not come around. Because I think one of the difficult things, in Chutz La'aretz, you have a very beautiful Yom Tov. Right? Yom Tov is beautiful, Yom Tov is uplifting, Yom Tov is wonderful. Really, you have a little bit more of the difference in Chutz La'aretz. Colomay. And Colomay is late. I know it's never been, and I talked to Colomay. Colomay is angry. That's the feel conjunctive happens here. Chutz La'aretz is a little bit more difficult to recreate. You have to feel on Colomay. It just is. And how beautiful is it that the Rebbe Shalom gave us an Eretz Yisrael Gemara in the first place Colomay. In the process was Colomay. So I said Colomay. And so for us, first day Colomay, the Hashemah who gave us an Eretz Yisrael Gemara, almost as if to have it just give us a little bit of that Kedusha. A little bit of that feeling, a little bit of that space of Eretz Yisrael. So how do you know, I guess? So it says here again, the Mishnah says that the rulings of a Sanhedrin, right, orderly translated, Sanhedrin no Hagas, Sanhedrin no Hagas, and Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz. We how do we know this? We don't know about it. But how do you feel like the Kukas Mishpat Migdolo Seta? Amani was teaching us, Sanhedrin no Hagas, La'aretz and the Chutz La'aretz. Sanhedrin operates both in Eretz Yisrael as well as in Chutz La'aretz. I indicate not Hamra B'Sha'ar. So if that's the case, that the Sanhedrin operates both in Eretz Yisrael and in Chutz La'aretz, so why does the Torah frame it, or why does the Torah say B'Sha'ar in your case? Which makes it sound like that the Sanhedrin only operates in Eretz Yisrael itself. So what's going on? Because in Israel said B'Sha'ar Atamoshe B'Atedim B'Chol Prat V'Prat U'B'Chol Ir V'Ir. In Eretz Yisrael, was a really works like this. And when you have the Sanhedrin above a high court, they operate within the rich vessel does it between the authorities and the Kosh. We also have buffet rooms in every province and in every city. Like a province is made up of multiple cities. So you have like a regional, provincial based Sanhedrin, and then you have smaller Sanhedrins or smaller buffet rooms in each city. That's where it's Israel. The Chutz La'aretz, Atamoshe B'Chol Prat V'Prat, the Atamoshe B'Chol Ir. In Chutz La'aretz, you have provincial buffet din, but not buffet din in every single city. So as I said, I just want to point out there, it's very interesting. The Rambam points out in this is Rambam, it brings down and we have also Sanhedrin. How you could go off with those is known Shendanim Dinin Nefashos Gary Israel, Danim Dinin Nefashos B'Chutzalaretz. So this is very interesting. When the Sanhedrin operates in Eretz Israel, Sanhedrin is in there, and the Sanhedrin adjudicates capital cases in Eretz Israel. You can adjudicate capital cases in Chutz La'aretz as well. With the caveat, Baruch Shiyah Sanhedrin Smichim Ba'aretz, Moshe Baruch Sanhedrin Arias Ba'aretz V'Chutzah. So what this means is as follows. When there is a proper operational Sanhedrin in Eretz Israel that is adjudicating capital cases. Now that applies to two things. Number one, Smichah. And number two, if the Sanhedrin is situated in the Rishkat HaGomes, in the Beit HaMikdash. If you have those two criteria, then the Sanhedrin is able to adjudicate capital cases. When the Sanhedrin adjudicates capital cases in Eretz Israel, it empowers Sanhedrins outside of Eretz Israel to adjudicate capital cases as well. That's really the takeaway from this. You kind of like, okay, let's go back. But let's say that last part of this was quite intriguing. And again, Sanhedrin HaRayas, so there's two different versions of this, right? And the first version, I found myself, but if Sanhedrin goes ahead and executes once every 7 years, it's considered to be a destroyer. Right? So the rest of the Isaiah said, either once every 70 years, and we calculated that the Akiva, if you sat on the Sanhedrin, it would never execute anywhere. The Shivim Shanwikin Kavlanis, Ogina Ayapology. So let's say this means. What is let's go to the topic of organizing our lives this morning. Organizing our lives saying that once every 7 years is normal. Like, in other words, that's okay. Is saying, listen, once every 7 years is too much. But once every 70 years, that's normal. But it makes even once every 70 years is too much. Which the Gemara says, take it. Take it, okay? That we talking about the Akiva or maybe Israel. And it goes to explain again. This was fascinating. So we talk about the Akiva said it. He said on the Sanhedrin, it wouldn't execute, wouldn't execute, to examine everyone. Now remember again, Shem also hands, but then there will be a proliferation of residents. I do 2 cents of all these things. So says, if you have obvious, so first of all, by the way, how exactly was that Akiva and Rabbi accomplished, right? So Akiva and Rabbi were confident that if they sat on the Sanhedrin, they would exonerate everyone. Okay, how exactly would you do that? If you have obvious, that's me. So the Gemara says, so if you have obvious, that you don't know about your leisure, your Amitabali, listen to this. Your Isem Shrefa, Isem Shrefa Harad, Shalom Harad. So listen to this. They would ask the following question. That's not a question. Right? So, did you kill? What's it like? So listen to this. It's Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Kafir, they were on the days and they say like this. Okay, so witness is shocked. They say, we saw Ruben kill Shimon. So they would ask, tell me, do you know was Shimon a healthy person, or what's your trait? And they say, what does this mean? Let's say Shimon is a trait. Let's say you did kill Shimon. Julie, the Gemara is like this. Right, let's say Shimon was a trait. What's the trait mean? Trait means that he has a condition for which he's imminently going to die. Now, what is if you kill someone like that? Technically speaking, you're not liable to that penalty. Now, we'll have to define the scope of that just a little bit more. But anyway, but the way it says, okay, witnesses, you saw the inflation coming. You know what should happen? The Shimon Shrefa, now that's the pashtos, the witnesses will be able to watch. They won't be able to answer that. They can answer that. So if they can't answer that, that seems to be grounds for exoneration. Right? On the Rashi, and things are on a shocking haba. And even if you want to say, let's say this is saying, well, we know that Shimon is totally healthy. How do we know? They both happen to be Shimon's general practitioners, right? I don't know, does HIPAA apply after the patient dies? I don't know if it applies. Right? But the nice that I go, all right, they say, you know what? We're general practitioners, and just came for his physical the day before, we gave him 50% of health, so that he's 100% healthy. I don't know, the muffins. side, not the hava. Did you give him maybe where in the place where you're in, when they had M statue, maybe he had a hole in his heart there. You didn't give him a complete diagnosis. Like you didn't give him an MRI or a CAT scan or whatever else. So maybe he had a hole in his heart which you didn't know about. But maybe he had some other defect. That's physical defect you didn't know about. The Gemara says, okay, the goal of so that would be the capital case. So essentially, what it is essentially the capital case. If you wanted to exonerate, the way you would exonerate would be to say to the witnesses, how do you know with certainty that you say you sold it to Shimon? Fine, so we're not even disputing that. Maybe Shimon was a traitor. Which was a traitor. Let's say, so that would have been grounds for exoneration. Now, the truth is, the counter to that is, the Chazaka is that what? People are traitors. Right? That, but again, nevertheless, we're trying to see, the point is that we keep on this pattern, what if it's worthy, a particular, question. And essentially, they would cast doubt on the fact that Reuben shouldn't be liable for killing Shimon if there's a possibility that Shimon essentially was only halachically dead. He was a traitor already. Okay, so that works. Let's say cases of murder. We're not accused of immorality. Let's say witnesses show up and they say that we saw Reuben committed adultery. We saw Reuben have relations with Shimon's wife. So how would Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Taka exonerate in that case? So the Gemara says, so they would have said like this, they say to witnesses, did you see the actual act of Bia? Literally translated, assuming you're applicable, did you actually see Bia? Right? That was you gotta be pretty up close and personal, right? To actually see that, right? And so, in other words, what they're saying is, you might have seen a lot of stuff that looks like adultery, but did you see the act itself? Now, the Pishkas, the answer to that 9.9 out of 10 times is going to be no. So the Gemara says, but Rabbanan, they eat 90. So it says, that's how they would have exonerated everyone. So in the case of murder, essentially the way they exonerated was to say, how do you know that Shimon was a whole and healthy person? Maybe he was a traitor. And in the case of Arise, they would have said, did you really see the actual act itself? And the answer to that would be no as well. That would have been grounds for exoneration. This was, and by the way, that's actually very interesting. Specifically, again, in the case of murder, so the reason we reject that line of question is because, as you said, the chazaka is that a person is not a traitor, unless of course you are like they are a traitor. What about the case of Ereva? What is say? Is that valid? Maybe it's just a law. If you don't do the actual act of Bia, maybe you can't convict. So how do we ever convict someone of immorality? But Rabbanan, because again, when you testimony about adultery or about alliance in general, the Eidim are not obligated to see the act. What are we obligated to see? Like circumstantial evidence that indicates to us that the Maisa an act of immorality occurred. Again, rarely are Eidim ever going to see actual alliance. Well, what are we going to see? We're going to see a man and woman behaving in a certain way that clearly indicates to us that forbidden sexual activity. And also, by the way, can't you go out and do this tomorrow now? What is that? Put this out on that home check out today. There's a beautiful minhag to actually learn Masech Soka over Sweden, because they're 40 on block. In Masech Soka. So the Rabbi had a very beautiful minhag to learn Masech Soka this weekend. I know you just got to remember this, but there's still time for Soka. There's always time for Soka, right? It doesn't get out right, which I understand. You understand what I mean? So that's incredible. Because also, that's what Soka is all about, right? Soka is a different kind. With Soka, our witnesses see a man and a woman, right? A woman was being warned about a certain man, they're living in a certain way. Now, they don't see Bia, or see Bia actually really, in that case, or they see a seclusion. Right? And that's why, again, interesting enough, that triggers all the process. But in general, when witnesses are showing up and they're saying, we've been committed adultery with Shimon's wife. So again, we're operating on Shmuel says that halacha l'maisa, rarely are they ever saying we saw active Bia. That's not what they're saying. But what they're saying is we saw enough to indicate to us that there was forbidden sexual activity that happened there. And also that's how we passed it. After Allah, he said, what's the first time? Our first parent in office. Our first parent in office. It's incredible. What a feeling. All right, right there. Salvation's over. But anyway, we're not going. Those is now, no, I'm going to take a little break, right? It was hard on the first day, do I do it's tough. Especially God question. What way is it today? Anyway, like, now we're going to focus a little bit on actually seeing that he's probably the most well-known sugya in Sefes Malchus, which is the halachos of your mikvah havon kedolos. Remember again, just a little brief background. A place leaving kills Shimon accidentally. We're going to define exactly what all of these terms mean. Leaving kills Shimon accidentally. The halacha is that leaving is sent to Kedolos, to a mikvah, to a city of refuge. A lot of details in the city of refuge, all of those details, Sefes Malchus. That's what we're going to deal with. So here we go. So for instance, now some of the focus is on what kind of case actually results in a I'm going to use the word carefully, it's not like this, obligation, punishment, or opportunity regardless. Right? We'll just say right now, what kind of act results in the obligation for the killer to go to Golis? Say, these are the following people who are sent into Golis. Ha'olid nefesh b'shkaga, right? Even kills Shimon by accident. By accident, so let's say what types of accidents result in Golis? Listen to this. So let's say Magra Magra is interesting. We used to have plastered roofs. Right? So how do you plaster your roof? You take plaster, and what do? You roll it, right? You roll the plaster. So he's taking this, so Ruben is taking his roller, and he's rolling out the plaster. And he drops the roller. Again, we'll discuss the plan. He drops the roller falls on Shimon and kills Shimon. Okay? Accidental or what happens? Ruben was lowering a barrel. Like, what happens? He lost holding the rope right in the ball. The rope snapped. Something happened. The barrel fell down on Shimon and killed Shimon. How you know it was Sulam? Ruben was coming down on the ladder. He slipped off the ladder where they're going to grow. He falls on Shimon. In all of these cases, in all of these cases, ultimately again, Ruben is the same color. So what's the common denominator in all of these cases? Ruben is killing with a downward motion, right? The case of the roller, I guess just you should know what I'm talking about is he's rolling down, he's rolling out, right? He's rolling down, and the roller slips out of his hand, throwing the downward motion falls down. He's lowering the barrel. The rope snaps, something happens, the barrel falls down. He's coming down on the ladder, falls down on Shimon. All these cases, Ruben is killing Shimon with a downward motion. This is where Ruben is going to be subject to Golis. And our emotion from not giving. Now follow. That's what I say. Ruben was going at a passing roof, but he was pulling the roller up, right? Upward motion, and then walked with the roller, right, and killed Shimon. Or how you don't live at obviously in some or he was hoisting up the barrel, right, and something happened, the rope snapped and the barrel fell down, or not on the hard bar, so on the base, how you hold up the suba. Did not fall off, or Ruben was going up the ladder, and ultimately again, and he fell down on Shimon. And once in all of these cases, Ruben is not sent to Golis. Why not? Because in these cases, that occurred through an upward motion. So once again, now we don't understand why there is this decision. According to Gemara's outlining the principle, Zakval, Kosher Derech Yiridasan, Gola, the Shaloba Derech Yiridasan, Ela Gola. So that's a really good general clause. Anytime Ruben kills Shimon, because of some type of downward motion activity, ultimately again, he's going up. He goes to Golis. Anytime ultimately again, it's not the Derech Yiridasan, it's not downward, but rather again, it's the upward motion because we go to Golis. I will say again, this is the kind of listen, it's a very beautiful line. You know, this line, Kosher Derech Yiridasan. I say, what happens if Halacha remains soft? The person is experiencing your reads of emotion. Since you read that things aren't going well. Things aren't going well, right? It's just, my life is now going in the direction I want it to go, right? So the day after you last night, what should you do? YOLO. What does YOLO mean? Change your circumstances. So a lot of times in life, when you're not in a good spot, what we tend to do is like a water. You just want to just stay there. Meanwhile, the Mishnah says if you're the guy who that's what happens to all of us alone, change your circumstances. Now again, maybe you can't change all of your circumstances, but there are always circumstances that are within our sphere of influence. So you're not in a good spot in life with the guy who does so, go back. Change your spot. Change your place, change whatever circumstances you can, and turn your situation, at least begin to change your situation around. You kind of like, all right, save me money. You know how to move. So okay, so what do I know this from? What do I know this from, right? So mission to you is cloud, but if even close shimmy with a downward motion, so within the center dollars, you have to get the close shimmy with an upward motion, is not center dollars. So what is the most you know this from? Dollars call, that you call, like the same classic says, Shabbat says, all the combination of the formula is Vayachel Allah, Vayalos. So it's actually pretty explicit. The Russian of the concept is Vayachel Allah, right? When the Torah describes the accidental killer, like the consequence of Tavi is overcall Evan Hashem on the spot below the edge, Vayachel Allah, Vayalos, but we will always know what in the Bhakti Shlasa. So the Lord speaks about the accidental killer. The Russian uses Vayachel Allah. He falls on it. So what do you see from here? The Allah said the demon is always visited upon someone who kills someone else in a downward motion. So let's say it's not a logic thing, it's a passive thing. It's a drasha. So now we're going to unpack this entire subject. So if you have a new Gemara, you can see by the way, you notice on the margins you have the psukim. So if you just take a look at the psukim of the this is the psukim of the slot. So it's replacing Lokan Alim Miklat. You're designating for yourselves, I'm doing psukim, now that's the Gemara. You're designating for yourself saves of refuge. You're not going to go Shama Retzeach Maki Nefesh Bishkala. The names are like Yevon Zoshav, the Sofakan, Tziyana Sheish Alim Ma'ir, and the Miklat, Mother Shama, Maki Nefesh Bishkala. So ultimately, again, the two goals. We're going to see it in the book. Somebody says accidentally. So now it's not about Bishkala. I mean, what do you mean Bishkala? Proclamation. This comes to us through something that kills intentional. As also we'll talk about this, that the cities of refuge is set up for people who kill that accidentally, not for people who kill intentionally. In fact, again, if you're an intentional killer, right, you're an intentional kill Shani, and decides to run from your miklat, what do? You get out. You come out. We're going to talk about this. We pull him out, and we send him to stand trial in Beis Din. So the three das, you then go Shani out intent, crack in the sky. This excludes someone who killed, right? You wouldn't kill Shani with intention. You know, says that's obvious. You know, says crack in the sky. So you know, says lazy, shoot that back. Totally. Listen, now obviously, if there's intention, then he's amazing. If he's amazing, then he's liable for that penalty. So what is it going to exclude? It comes to exclude someone who says, now what's holding the case? So if it says in case we're moving toward chilling. But when you go out and you say, moving says, I thought it was motor. So listen, this is what happens when you don't pay attention to shit. I thought it was motor. Now obviously we're talking about a legitimate case, but we never actually thought that what we did was motor. Interestingly enough, but you must say the case. Even though moving will not be executed, right? In the case where someone thinks that what he did was motor, he won't execute it under those circumstances, but at the same time what? At the same time, he doesn't go regardless. Right? He's not sent to the exile. You don't get your mikvah in case of only motor. Only Abaye, only motor. Honestly, that's like if he thinks that it's motor, isn't that extenuating circumstances? Is that a police? And then Shanyomer, only motor, how does it mean? Now I hold the Omer Mutter, so when Ruben goes Shimon, and Ruben says, yes, I did it, but I thought it was Mutter, that's what we call Karov V'Nezi. So I say, in other words, it's not Shogeg, right? Why isn't it Shogeg? Why isn't it accidental? Why? Because there was intentionality. It's not lazy because he didn't have in mind to do something wrong. He thought it was mutter. So I say, so only mutter on one hand isn't shogeg. It's color lazy, right? It's close to lazy, but not lazy. It's also not executed, but at the same time, it also doesn't go to bonus. So the lidas, without intention, part of the stabbing. This is right Kavana. That's obviously not just discovered. She could have the I will say, if we're going to go Shimon, we're going to test with Shimon, we don't look like again, he's liable to not going to do Shimon says, no, what's the case? Practically, the scabby knowledge is at the end of the heart of the Sahaba. Interesting. What about Ruben? Right, so what's the last case? Ruben had intention to kill, had intention to hunting, had intention to kill a deer, but instead he killed Shimon. Or, you see, this is right. Or you have intention to kill a Susi, which again, not good, but also not liable to that penalty. But he ends up killing Yisrael. The Minta Bahar Ben Kayama. He had intention to kill Minta, like a non-viable child, but instead he killed a regular person. So all of these cases, interestingly enough, you don't go to Galus. Right? If you go to Galus, why not? Because it wasn't fully accidental, right? There was intentionality for an act of bloodshed. Just it was supposed to be quote unquote a permitted act. It turned out to be a prohibited act. So again, because there wasn't some level of intentionality, you can't go to obviously you're not going to execute for that, but the also can't go to Galus because there wasn't a level of intentionality. You can't run on it. Maybe pass up. Maybe it can happen suddenly. But it carries others. This is the case of a court. And also, I also think of a Dutch very interesting. That's the vice area. Ruben is walking with a knife, an outstretched knife. Right? Why? I don't know. Like his mother always told him don't run with scissors, right? He's having some mother issues, right? So he decided, after the dying, I'm walking around with outstretched scissors. And that's what he's doing. And so it makes sense. Now again, he's just walking like that. What happens? He comes around the corner. Shimon comes around the corner, and he ends up killing Shimon. Now again, he didn't have intention to kill Shimon, right? He was just holding an outstretched knife. That's what was happening. So so the Mesa, in this case over here, he's not going to go to Dallas, right? Why won't he go to Dallas? Because at the end of the day, there was some level of intentionality. You can't say that this was totally accidental. On the other hand, of course, it's not going to be executed if men didn't kill Shimon. The law is about without animosity, practice Sunday. This comes to its true ultimately again in enemies. We'll talk about this more. The nice again, if there's some pre-existing beef, between ultimately again Ruben and Shimon, we'll see what to do with that, but Ruben will not go to Galus. Hagafal, Shigaf of the Gufal, Oshiki, Oshishti, Allah. Ultimately, we're talking about a case where even Ruben kills the Shimon by pushing him, by pushing his body against him, or that even is thrown upon Shimon and killed him like that. It's not more about that as well. Lahabi Yehuda, so you must always put Allah. Lahabi Yehuda, Shitzaret Allah. This comes to exclude the case of the Torah and this many of going down, Yehuda, for the purpose of going up. The road should be up without intention, or I should say, the road means without intention to kill, partly miscovered. Mitzad Zad, the hospital, Mitzad Achar. It comes to a stage where the magic one is doing through a lot. Like his intention was to go to the left. And went to the right and ended up killing Shimon. So what you begin to see about Shara, let's say Shabbat Shabbat, he did not have intention. Partly miscovered was not trying to resolve how it comes to its case, the intention to throw for 2 hours, and instead it went for 4 hours. So what you begin to see is the theme. What's the theme over here? When did Ruben go to Dallas? Essentially, they included Torah. Right? He did not have in mind at all. What you begin to see is any situation where Ruben had some level of intentionality. Some level of intentionality. Even if it was intentionality to kill an animal, but he killed the person. They throw back 2 hours. So they went 4 hours, right? He rounded the corner, he realized what was on the other corner. If there's a level of intentionality, that of course does not rise to the level of intentionality to make us high with Musa, but it will preclude him from going to Goddess. Goodness is only like exiles here in this box is only for someone who is a full or complete shogeg. If there's any level, even a little bit of some level of functionality, no goodness. This was the reason of deep love that we're going to continue to kind of brush up as we go forward. Let's just do a little bit of a stop. So it was the lad. So ultimately, again, it's interesting. The way that the Torah phrases this, where is all of this happening? In the forest. So let's say, so the paradigmatic case of accidental death is where Reuben is going ahead and chopping wood in the forest, and what happens? So you're going to see somehow he ends up killing Shimon. Whether it's because the axe head flies off or because the splinter of wood flies off, but the paradigmatic case is where it's happening in the forest. So you notice why forest? Why forest? So you notice my Irish system is that for the most we put it on after which is when is actually a massive information. Because a forest is a place where both parties have the right to be there. So if Allah is just as the forest again, both Reuben and Shimon have the right to be there. So again, the only time when there's a few dollars is when both parties have a right to be there. For example, if Shimon comes into Reuben's property uninvited, so what happens to Shimon? So Reuben is not necessarily liable for that, right? Or conversely, if Reuben goes onto Shimon's property, also that's not really accidental. In order for it to be an accidental death, a number of factors have to be in place. Number one, we've established zero intentionality, right? And number two, it has to be an area where both parties are committed to be. Next. So now this is an interesting case here. All of the Sulam, the Nishma Kashtiba Mikaftab, the Nafla Hargo, Mahi. Those are leftovers. Let's say Reuben is going up on a ladder. And what happens? The run buckles underneath him, and therefore again he falls down onto Shimon. Now what's this? The Gemara says, Madu, what is the halacha in this case? And what's unique about this case? What's unique about this case? On one hand, which direction is Reuben going? And yet, how does he exert his force? Down. So the Shaila is, so now let's say Reuben falls down on Shimon. So what is it? So what is it in Mishnah? If Reuben kills Shimon with an upward motion, no bonus. Downward motion, there is bonus. So what do you do in a case like this, where on one hand, his intention is to go up, or he's going up the ladder, but it's a downward motion that caused the breakage of the rung that caused him to come down onto Shimon. So what again? Because it was like the paradigmatic case of the ladder that we were going over this as well. It's paradigmatic case. When he's coming down the ladder, he slips off and he falls down Shimon. In this case, he's going up, so it's a lead-off, but at the same time, it was a downward force that broke the rung and caused him to fall down. So is that called aliyah or yurida? So the Gemara says, no, it's not. Is this called ascension? Is it called aliyah? And therefore, Reuben will not go to Dallas, or yurida? Or is this called going down? And therefore, Reuben will go to Dallas. So again, it says, okay, we've touched on this already. This is the case of Yurida Mitzorah Aliyah. So this is the case of going down for the purpose of going up. Rashi says we're going to Kvanagata. Harinagata can be read Shitzorah Aliyah. Haladino Me'el Yehiyuha. So notice just so here, we've spoken about this before, and you're trying for this kind of case. See the breakage of the rung happens with the downward force. This is called Yurida. This is called descent. This is called going down. And therefore, halacha l'meisa, you be tired. Now, whether that's halacha l'meisa, we'll have to see. That's we don't want to suggest right now. No, we're not finished. H.A. says, this is the rule. Kosher, we got to do that's the goal line. Sure, we got to do that's that. Goal line. So we write the Mishnah say, what is the rule? Anytime that you kill someone in a downward motion, goes to Dallas. Not in a downward motion, doesn't go to Dallas. So you know, so the guy who does not sweet in mind. So when you say going down, what does this come to include? Lavla Asui, Kiagano, doesn't it come to include this case? Other than when going up the ladder, we're going to go up the ladder, but again, it's the pressure inserted downward that causes the run to break. And we see ultimately a very excited.
I thought he was going to say, like,
which wasn't low. My Lavla Asui Kiagano, we'll try it. Also, that is that's not sweet. What does culture that is come to include? It says, my Ella Suye cuts up. It comes to include the butcher. What's the butcher case? So the Pashtus, the case of the butcher sounds like the butcher is chopping, thank you. And what happens? He comes down with the knife. Let's say he's coming down, the knife sticks out of his hand to shimmy. So there's how very last year cuts up. The sign of very interesting. The sign of how to shave the cuts is. This is this. The butcher, let's cut meat. This is this. Tanakada, so what's the whereas I'm 2 points for rice to here. Tanakada, one rice says, the fun of Kaila Akara Potter. If he kills in front of his fire, in back of his potter, Tanya Ida, that's you, Tanya Ida, Akara Kaila for a potter. What rice up? And if he kills in back of his fire, in front of his potter, Tanya Ida, in the front of the Akara fire, but he kills in front of him or back of his fire. Because Ida, in the front of the Akara potter. And I'm not going to say that because the front of the Akara potter. What is this? Look at you. That's not a contradiction. It's basically, can be a reader shall have not value shall have. Right? So there's a one nice talking about a case. Now here, let's say, for the butcher, there's 2 options, right? First, when he chops soup, what is he doing? First, he goes up, and then he comes down. So again, can be reader shall have. So the basis says that he's tired. In front of him, what's something that will kill us to the down motion as he comes value shall have. Versus when he comes back, right? The upper motion back, I think, can value shall have the second right, let's talk about a case where the aliyah is in front of him and the Yerida is in back of him. Can the Yerida shall have the shalah? After all, third right is something like again. Where the Yerida is in front and in back, can the aliyah shall have the shalah? Right? So that's it. So it's really actually very simple. In the butcher cases, where is the butcher going to be $5? When he kills with the downward motion of the knife, and he kills with the upward motion of the knife, wherever the upward motion is taking place, ultimately again is going to be touching. Incredible. So many containers. So let's say, so again, so we're still focused on our case over here. He is going up the ladder, right? And when he presses down on the rung breaks and he falls down on his shin. So that is what we call aliyah, and we it's all that aliyah. There is downward motions, but the downward motions for the purpose of going up. So in halacha, how do we look at that? Is that called ascent, or is that called descent? Remember, in the afternoon is big, right? The afternoon is just long. Because if it's ascent aliyah, he's not chayav. If it's neither descent, he is chayav. So which one is it? Which one is the limit of the night? What's the last short line? Limit of the night. Chaya only is the limit of the night. Back there. The Judah was going up the ladder, and ultimately again was blown up right as he was going ahead and ascending the ladder. So Tanya Kada Chayir, the Tanya Ida Potter, one verse says he's Chayir, one verse says he's Potter. So my love happened in Phyllis, I'll be arguing about how it is. The Mar Savi Ridini, the Mar Savi Ridini. So he's not focused. Again, let's say, it's good days. What is this? Is this called Aliyah or Yerida? Is it ascent or descent? No. The Chuli Alma Aliyah. He says, no, not true. Everybody agrees on that in this case, this is called Aliyah. This is called going up. It's going up. What's the way to think about it? It has to be that way. Right? Why? Because if it's not that way, then what? There's never a case of ascent, right? So by definition, every ascent requires pressure downward. If you're going to say that any ascent, right, the ultimate you're going to call Yerida Yitzorah Aliyah, or Aliyah, Yitzorah Aliyah, that when moving goes up the ladder, and he breaks the rung because he's pressing downward. If that is called descent, in the Mesa, there's no case of ascent. The only way to ascend, by definition, is to exert pressure downwards. So it has to be that that's called the case of aliyah, and therefore, again, if Yehuda were to go ahead and go up the ladder, break the rung as he's ascending the ladder, fall down and shimmy and kill him, he would not go to guts. That's called aliyah, not Yehuda. It has to be that way. Hello, Patrick, let me do two vices. He says, come and be come and guys. When the Bryce says that he's fighting, fight doesn't mean guns. What does fight mean? Damages. damages. And let's say Ruben going up the ladder, and he breaks the rung as he's going up. He falls down on shin and he doesn't kill him. He injures him. What's that like? Oh, see, it's high damages. The rest of the it's an accident. It's an accident. Like, damages. The seeking 101 is more deal. A person is always liable for any damages he does. Accidental, he doesn't have to do it. It's high for everything. The other place that says that he's partner, that's talking about the dollars. He was the way about the use. Half of how we dollars. We're talking about dollars. Let's talk about party history, popular history. So that's very interesting. The other possibility is talking about his followers. Yeah, I love for an answer. One is talking about a world-pleasing ladder. So let's say the rung is eaten by it, which means that it's rotted. So let's say in that case where it's rotted, so that's what I say, if then Shimon were to go and step on it, to break, that would be called Judita. That would be called descent. Why? Because since we're talking about a ladder that's not really capable of going ahead and holding this weight and sustaining this ascent, that's considered to be descent, and therefore it would be followed in that kind of case. Interesting. If you actually just want to talk to this thing, it's understood whenever you have a rung, what's going to happen? It's going to sag. It's going to sag. Therefore, by definition, that is called descent. So the service in the matter, in no misdeed, all the other possibilities it says, even if or if we're talking about cases of ladders that are not eating that worms, but Okasha, and it's talking about a case where the rung is properly fastened in place, and one is where it wasn't properly fastened in place. Meaning what? If it is properly fastened in place, that's a proper ladder. And if I get a rough if the rung breaks, as we did is ascending, that's called ascent, and as we look at it, and it's like high dollars. If it wasn't properly fastened in place, then that's going to be called descent, and you're going to be tired. So let's say, descent, you might say it like this. But how often, for myself, if you don't go up the ladder, in a regular case, seeing that the ladder is a proper ladder, right? It's not rotting, right? It's properly fixed. Ruben's going up the ladder, and figure out what happened. As he's going up, he snaps the rung. And you don't know why is the rung being snapped. Why is it snapping? Because of the downward pressure, but we don't look at that as descent. Rather, we only view that ultimately again as ascent, and therefore Allah so Ruben would not go to Golis in that situation. Unless it has the apostate, but listen to this. So the Rambam says the verbals will say after here it is. Here it is. Here it is. Haya Ola B'Shiva, B'Mishmika Shviva Yishachas Rabbi, B'Nafla B'Yisha. Ruben's going up the ladder, and what happens? As he's going up, the rung snaps under him, and as he snaps, he falls down on Shimon and kills Shimon. What's the halacha? Pata min hadalis. Ultimately, again, Ruben is pata from Dalis. Now, why I will say? Because again, the Gemara has things that Yerida Yisola Aliyah is called Aliyah. Yitzhak Aliyah is called, but ultimately, again, downward motion for the sake of going up is called upward. Right? Aliyah is so good. No, it's Yerida Yisola Aliyah. Right? Because again, what you're doing is you're pushing down for the purpose of going up. Right? So Yerida Yisola Aliyah, exerting downward pressure for the purpose of going up, is not called Yerida, it's called Aliyah. And therefore, again, by definition, when Yerida is ascending, now again, remember, if it's a lot of ladder, right? If it's a poorly constructed ladder, again, then that's a different kind of case. But assuming that it's a proper ladder, but even though again the Ruben is going up, he's exerting downward pressure, that is called ascension, and therefore Allah so Ruben would not be carried Golis in that case. Now this side, the Mr. Haskell is screaming us in the back. And when you see from here, Yerida Yisola Aliyah is called Aliyah. On this side, a lot of times in life, it'd be wonderful to think that life is like this perpetual journey upwards. It's not like that. No, you have one of those experiences where things are so good spiritually, and then something happens, and then you are thrown into this valley. And so special and so upsetting. And a person feels like all of my work, everything I did to build myself up, is now gone because I look at this descent. Look at what happened. So what's one of the most beautiful things in Yiddishkeit is when you descend, right? When you have your rebirth, when you have the spiritual descent, it offers us another opportunity to learn so much about ourselves, to learn so much about our weaknesses. Right? When I make a mistake in myself, when I get myself to a bad spot in life, that teaches me, that shows me that my spiritual kick is here. If I use those moments of the rebirth to learn about myself, to learn about my weaknesses, and to build that better, then it turns out that the rebirth is with Sorah Aliyah. Those descents, those spiritual descents, fuel my strength. And once they work for and if you rebirth with Sorah Aliyah, if your spiritual descent, you realize that to bring yourself back better to a son's, when you rebirth with Sorah Aliyah, is considered to be an Aliyah. And I say that it turns out that even with descents in life, ultimately they are judged as an lesson. Even the Yorigos are considered to be an Aliyah if the Yorigos are used ultimately again for a spiritual balance. And I say this is one of those beautiful things in Yiddishkeit. When we fail, our avoid is not to wallow in it. When we fail, our avoid is to ask ourselves, why did I fail? What happened today? What can I learn about myself? What can I learn about my life? How through my weaknesses can I grow to become a better person? If in those moments of failure, I learn about myself, I build myself up even stronger, then the failure itself, then the Yehuda itself becomes an Aliyah. The Yehuda itself becomes a moment ultimately again of spiritual ascension. If my Yehudas are just Yehudas, I don't do anything with it, then just Yehudas. But if the Yehudas, if the mistakes in life become the opportunity to learn about myself, to build myself back even stronger, then even the Yehuda is an Aliyah. And it ultimately again becomes a Yehuda with Sorah Aliyah. And the halacha l'maisa, the hashkafa l'maisa, is that Yehuda with Sorah Aliyah is called an Aliyah. A descent. For the sake of ascending, even the descent is part of the physical and the spiritual ascent. Rosai, Shkoyach. All right, Kevin, I'm going to get everyone.
How much is 2 times 2 plus 2? Absolutely no fucking idea. 64, 66 on a good day. That is the bird. This is a Montreal Juliet 235. The process is does it sound like Stevie? I hate his voice. I don't think it sounds like Stevie. Every time I saw Stevie used to come to Los Angeles at a library. I think he just maybe was at the library watching to stand up. However, I wish I could call us back. What are you doing? What are we doing here? Why are you here? I said,
All right, Kevin, say. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share to Phil.
This is the guy that is like pretending to be Brian. But isn't Brian there with him?
Hey, our annual comic book party. Dr. Mercy Show. We're dedicating all the show and justice this year.
I'm gonna fill my mouth with water, and each team gets 10 seconds to make me laugh. More water. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the live taping of Brian Callen's stand-up special.
There's so much extra conscious for the month of December. Following the purple Chachal, the celebration of the Nisan birthdays of his happy and granddaughter sister Esther, and on the birth of the grandson to Ila and Jeremiah Pollack of Indianapolis, Indiana, Mazel Tov and Mazel Tov. Anonymous Commodore sponsorship in the schools of Seeders for all of our children, and for this to be a month of the English name for Providence. Avram Shim, the Atonement, winning Avram's mother, Sarah, Brenda, Bas, Yoshua, Hesher, Zichron, and we thank all of our sponsors for incredible generosity. We have got America by Commodore, all of the Shannon family, and the families there from all of this new report. Skype together with Paul, Tony, East, all of the sponsors who know that should move on hostages home. The Shannon and the partner, our holy soldiers to be successful. The call and Maaseh, okay, so with that, let us see the beautiful God ahead of us today. Today's God. We are picking up on days of the days of 12 lines up from the bottom. Night and nighty Rabbi. So it's discriminating yesterday that we ended up with as follows. We saw Gemara highlighted two unique things, unique qualities that apply to Abram's only that the Akiva added on a fourth. And interestingly enough, one of the things that we saw that Abram's only is that they don't pay kofar. Like remember again, if my ox goes ahead and kills someone, there is a payment that's called kofar, which means a kofar. There is Abram's only do not pay kofar. So remember again, we might begin with a discussion about what is kofar. Is kofar kapara? Right? Is kofar ultimately is an atonement payment? Is it mamon? Is it a monetary payment? So we want to ultimately end it off with the fact that kofar is kapara. Right? Kofar is an atonement payment. There's a machlokes over here between the Rabbanon and Rabbi Shmuel about how you value that payment. Rabbi Shmuel, with the Nizak Shemina. Oh, sorry, with the Mazik Shemina. You go ahead and you value the payment ultimately again based on the value of the damager, which makes sense because since it's an atonement payment, therefore Allah comments he has to sort of give his value. But with the Rabbanon, on the other hand, with the Nizak Shemina. We go ahead and you value the payment based on the value of the damaged party. So that's what we're picking up. So why is it that now here's what's interesting is this seems to be inherently contradictory. If you hold that kofar payment is a kapara, is an atonement payment, right? If that's what it is, then logically, what should it be? What should the value be based on? Should the value be based on the damager, right? If I'm the person whose ox killed Reuben, so it makes sense that I have to pay my word. In other words, again, something of mine took the life of another. I should have to pay my value. That makes sense. But according to the Rabbanon, you said that you pay the value of the victim, what you've shot. So here it goes. The one says as follows: Lemar hashasa lamato, lemar hashasa lamala. So more interesting enough, it says hashasa. Hashasa means to impose a payment upon someone. So it says hashasa. Lamata, and again, Rashi points out over here, Never Hashasa Lamata, or the Mal, excuse me, he says, Benoget Isha Harat Kasha Yoshes Alabala Isha. There's two cases. Case number one is where two men are fighting, the men are fighting, and the man goes ahead and bumps into a pregnant woman, causing her to miscarry. So the Torah explains that halacha l'maisa, the Ruvain, the perpetrator, has to go ahead and pay for the miscarriage. Now, what does it mean? He pays a value. He pays a value. Now, what's the value? The value is the value of the victim. Right? The difference in value is when he's pregnant, when he's not pregnant. So Ruvain goes ahead and has to pay that amount. So the Torah used the word hashasa, which means we impose a financial penalty, a revolving penalty, upon the perpetrator of the damage. So whereas whenever hashasa lamala, mala halon bigin mizok afkam b'nezik. So once it says hashasa by the damaging of a pregnant woman, it says hashasa by kofar, just like hashasa by the pregnant woman. Everyone agrees bigin mizok shem. We evaluate damages based on the value of the victim. So to again in the hashasa. So when it comes to valuation of damages or valuation of kofar, we do it by the value of the victim. Okay, Rabbi Shmuel, and that's like the Yonashon see. Rabbi Shmuel who holds again that halacha l'maisa, kofar is based on the value of the damager. He says, when you better say what the Torah says, b'nasan kibyon nafsho. You have to give a redemption for your soul, which sounds like again you have to give your value, the damager's value. To which the Gemara says, "Rabbanan in Pidyon now shows yeah, it's true that everyone's agreeing with this. Everyone's agreeing that kofar ultimately again is kapara. Kofar ultimately again is an atonement. But nevertheless, how do we value that atonement? So Rabbanan in Pidyon now shows Kishamino Pidyon is a Shamino. It's true, it's an atonement payment. And how do we evaluate that atonement payment? Ultimately based on the value of the damaged party. Okay, so most of this fucking job is as follows. Now remember, for our purposes, ultimately what comes out is really two pieces of information. Number one, even Zonim don't take apart, don't take over. So for example, just to illustrate the case, even Zonim shopping days, what are they testifying to? They're claiming that we saw Ruvain's ox kill Shimon. Okay? It turns out, the second set of witnesses show up, you couldn't have seen that you were us at that time that Ibn Zolim. You know when you reciprocal punishment? No reciprocal punishment over here. Why not? Because we've established kofar is kapara, is an atonement payment. So it doesn't make sense to impose an atonement payment upon the Ibn. Why? They didn't do anything. They did something. They testified falsely. But they didn't do anything in that. They didn't kill anyone. The ox didn't kill anyone. So therefore you can't impose an atonement payment as someone has not committed the infraction. So that's our purpose. Now he wants another as an aside. There's another reason that we'll guess about how do you evaluate the kofar payment. Rabbi Shmuel says with the message Shimon. So Ruvain, the owner of the ox, will pay to Shimon. We're going to pay to Shimon's heirs. Ultimately, again, without Ruvain's value. There's no value. It's his atonement payment. Again, the Rabbanan no, but the Mizak Shani, the payment ultimately again is according to the value of the victims. That not whole case is still there. We're not really into that too much right now. But our purpose is not even so much our focus. And we're going next. They become evident. This is interesting. Even Zolim are not sold as an evident. Now, what does this mean? So remember again, Halacha Maisa, here's the case. Witnesses 1 and 2 show up. What do they say? We saw Ruvain steal from Shimon. Now, Ruvain does not have the money to pay back the theft. In general, if you steal and don't have the money to pay back the theft, what's halacha? You're sold as an evident. So they're testifying against Ruvain that he stole. Ruvain doesn't have the money to pay back, which means under these circumstances, Ruvain would be sold as an evident. Okay? So the halacha is if it turns out that they made him to Ibn Zolim, we don't impose reciprocal punishment, they're not sold as evidence. So you want to say something like so if I'm going to say, when is this so? How do you read? That's ultimately again where Ruvain himself had money. Ruvain himself had money, so Ruvain himself would not have been sold as a slave. The Migo, the evil known as Davin, and Ruvain known as Davin. So since ultimately again, Ruvain himself wouldn't have been sold because Ruvain has money to pay back the stolen out. So to the Eden wouldn't be sold as well. Okay, about Hajj, the last day of the day, this is the so if Amina wants his chest, but if Ruvain doesn't have money, right? So Ruvain would have been sold. Even though the Eden do have money, right? So if Ruvain didn't have money, even if the Eden do have money, means that the Eden are sold. Wow. So what's that? That's intense. And so if the witness says that Ruvain stole from Shimon and Ruvain doesn't have money, so if that Ruvain would have been sold. Now it turns out that the Eden are Eden Zolim, the Eden are sold. So we verses 1 second. I'm going to Rabbi, but they were like, we have this done. Why can't we say this Ruvain? Hold up over here. Ruvain, if you had money, you wouldn't have been sold either. Why should the witnesses be sold if they have money? In other words, halacha l'maisa, even if Ruvain would have been sold, but Ruvain would have had money, he could have bought himself out. If you want to impose reciprocal punishment upon the Eden, so go ahead and say, if they don't have money, they can be sold also. But it might say, if they do have money, why shouldn't they be able to buy themselves out of servitude? Allah, verses you right. As I said, Rabbi, the said as follows. As you said, timely, if of the Islam only be day, only be done. We said, when did we say that Eden are not sold as the evidence? What is that? When someone in the equation has money, right? Either Ruvain himself, right, or the witnesses, right? Because if Ruvain himself has money, that means Ruvain wouldn't have been sold. If Ruvain wouldn't have been sold, you can't sell the witnesses, or even if Ruvain doesn't have money, so Ruvain would have. would have been sold. And now we see composers reciprocation upon the Aiden, and the Aiden say, well, we do have money. So again, we're happy. We're willing to pay. But again, just like if you had money, you could have bought yourself out of servitude. So if we have money, we should also be able to buy ourselves out of servitude. So that's the halacha. So listen to this. The last day, lo livdi day, the lo livdi go, is that. The halacha nice now. It says, but when neither Ruvain nor the Aiden have money, then what's the halacha? The witnesses are sold. Incredible. Right? So the case where no one has money, right? Ruben doesn't have money, the Aiden don't have money, no one has money, which means that Ruben would have been sold as an evidence, and the witnesses don't have money either. In that case, it wouldn't be sold into servitude. That's right, Hanuna. Now again, I'm going to say no, absolutely not. That is not the halacha. And in carbonate of the neighbor, some rahmana, the neighbor, some love, the some life. But says no, it's not true. The concept of being sold as an evidence is a unique halacha that applies to the thief himself. It doesn't apply to the reciprocal punishment of Aiden Solomon. So we begin to see this theme emerging, right? So as much as the Torah prescribes, reciprocity for Aiden Solomon, there are certain punishments that are reserved for the actual perpetrator of the crime that cannot be replicated in a reciprocal scenario. So again, over here, the concept of being sold as an evidence is something that is reserved for the thief himself. The person who steals, you borrow, you steal, you can't take back that which you have stolen. You're sold as an evidence. When Aiden Zolman come into the picture, they can be forced to pay the value of the theft, right? Or the accused theft, I suppose it was not like that. But for the most part, they can't be sold. Same thing with Cobra. But Cobra is an atonement payment. Who has to pay an atonement payment? The person who committed the crime, right? The person who committed the act. But if you didn't commit the act, then there's no such thing as an atonement payment. Okay, so that's the halacha. Good. So I said that being is next. We try to keep it on this order. I mean, keep it added in. At in the shang at the atlas. This is very interesting. So we keep it added also over here. In addition to the first three, I mean, there's an Aiden Zolman also can't pay or aren't made to pay based on their own admission. Okay, so what's the case? Right, that Rabbi Akiva. What Rabbi Akiva's logic? What's Rabbi Akiva's logic? Kasara knasim. The knasim shall not be asking. Very simple. Let's say the reciprocal payment is a knas. Remember again, in the world of financial payments, there are two different types of payments. What are the two different types of payments? Number one, mamon, which is actual compensation, compensatory payments, or knas, which is a penalty. But how do you know there's some knas and mamon? Mamon is logical, knas is illogical. But so that knows, when I say illogical means it doesn't seem to have anything to do with the actual value of the damage committed. Aiden Zolman is a knas. It's a penalty. So the given is a principle that when it comes to knas, ultimately again you cannot pay a knas based on your own admission. Or as we've stated it before, motive the knas, potter. If you admit that you owe a penalty payment, you potter. So that's why Rabbi Akiva says that witnesses show up. Right? It's amazing. The witnesses say, we are Aiden Zolman. We're like, okay, have a nice day. But we're not going to impose reciprocal punishment upon them because it's knas and not to be knas potter. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi. Rabbi says, Sastida, Sherla Asimaisa, then they had Rabbi Yerushalmi. So the Gemara says, Rabbi says, I'll tell you, I'll show you that it's knas. I don't know that it's knas. Aiden Zolman do not actually do a nice. Like the one said, he asked, what did Aiden Zolman do? What did they do? It was speech. The speech keyboard is not the nice song. Yet even if they didn't do a nice, technically speaking, they could be executed. And they're going to be executed again. In the case where they show up and they say, we saw you in Kill like on Friday. And then the second story, they show up and say, no, you couldn't have been there on Friday because you were with us on Friday. Aiden Zolman, and we put them to death. So Rabbi says, if you want to understand how we know that Aiden Zolman are knas, just look at the mechanics of it. Right? Just look at the mechanics. At the end of the day, they didn't actually do a nicer yet, they can still be put to death. That shows that it's a knas. Right? Rav Nachman comes along, Rav Nachman says, I'll show you its class as well. Look, Ibn Zoman, for example, let's say they claim Ruvain went ahead and Ruvain bought $1,000 from Shimon and he didn't pay that. Okay, then if it turns out that the Ibn Zoman, they have to pay $1,000. Meanwhile, Ruvain, money never left Ruvain's hands. All they're doing is testifying. Like the fact that they do not actually cause Ruvain a loss of money, nevertheless, what? They have to pay. What does that show? But it's knas. It's knas. So the words at the top of so the says, I don't understand. Never say, certainly from the way the more structured, then Rabbi and Rav Nachman are saying two different things. But the truth is, they seem to be saying the same exact thing, which is how do you know that Ibn Zoman is a knas? Because at the end of it, there was no Maisa. Like there was no action, yet a lot for a Maisa, they're still alive. It is the word says, my nihu, the law asa Maisa, and the Rabba. So again, with Nachman, you're saying the same thing as Rabba. Like Rabba said, Ibn Zoman didn't even do a Maisa, yet they could be put to death. And then Nachman says, essentially, they didn't even do a Maisa, because look, they didn't even extract money from one party, yet they can still be liable. So Nachman, aren't you saying the same thing as Rabba? Eva, you're right, the thing about Nachman. Right, the Nachman is not coming to say anything new, but ultimately, again, the Nachman is coming to add on to Rabba's statement. So, says this is incredibly important. Ibn Zoman, your reciprocal payment, is a knas, is a penalty, Because it is a penalty, that's what Rabbi Akiva comes along and says, that if Ibn admit that they are Ibn Zoman, then Halach and Lamaisa, they are not forced to pay reciprocal payment. How do we know that Ibn Zoman is a knas? Because they went to a Maisa, they didn't do anything, right? All they did is they cut their speech, right? They offered up Eidos, and yet at the end of the day, there's still liability. Okay, says the Imam, I'm going to go around. They say, second line, go around. I'm going to go around. Eid Zoman, Mishani Pi Chalka. An Eid Zoman, this is a very interesting case, right? An Eid Zoman, a Zoman witness, and for a singular witness, Mishani Pi Chalka, he pays his portion. So when it says, what does that mean? What exactly does that mean? The Haimushali Palga, the Haimushali Palga, Tanina. Mishal Shimon, Mishal Shimon Malchus. So let's say, so are you telling me this? Right, witnesses show up, right? Witness 1, witness 2. They claim that Ruvain stole $1,000 from Shimon. So they're looking to make Ruvain valuable $1,000. Turns out the agent is someone. What do we do? We say $. How do we split it? Witness 1 pays 500, witness 2 pays 500. Okay, that's we already learned that. Right? That's a Mishnah. We split money, but we don't split malchus. Rabbi said, this is very interesting. What does that mean? But when you're obviously making it, is this? We'll get to it over 2 days ago. There's a sense to this, but it says that this same case. Witness 1 and 2 show up. What do they claim? They claim we saw Ruvain near Shabbos. We saw Ruvain eat chazer. So it says, now what's the halacha to eat chazer? What's the halacha? Malchus. So now it turns out that the second time witnesses show up and they say, you couldn't see Ruvain eating chazer because you're with us. Okay. So now we give Malchus to the Ibn Zoman. So let's assume for a moment, right? Malchus is 39. Let's call it 40. I didn't know, but it's really 40. So you would have thought like this, right? Or I would have thought maybe witness 1 gets 20. Witness 2, that's the way it works. Each of the witnesses get the full measure of Malchus because we split monetary awards or monetary knas, but not Malchus, right? So let's say again, if they were going to make Ruvain pay $1,000, each witness will pay 500. But by Malchus, each one gets the full measure of Malchus. So we're learning that. So what is it teaching us? Halakha is very interesting. So Halakha to Itzu Chavinanu, to the Shalom Palka video. What's this fashion? Rather, what does it mean? What does Rob's statement mean? That an aid zone pays his share. What it means is like this. Let's say only one of the witnesses will manage with aid zone. Right, so for example, right, witness 1 and 2 show up and they say, we saw Ruvain steal $1,000 from Shimon on Friday. Okay? So now the second witnesses show up and they say, witness 1, you cannot have seen that you were with us. Now the second set of witnesses are only testifying about witness 1. They're not testifying about witness 2. So it sounds like what they can do is they can make witness one into an eight zoning, and he'll have to pay his portion. In other words, he won't have to pay the $4,000. He'll pay $500 because that quote unquote was his portion of the Avis. The verse is 1 second. When you Shalom, does that actually work? God can you learn? In eight zone the Shalom no more achers and Mishnayim. Of course, that's not the way it works by Hazama, right? By reciprocal punishment. The way it works either is the entire testimonial unit is made into Eidim Zomanim, or none of them are Eidim Zomanim. In other words, you can't make one witness of the unit into an Eidim Zomanim. It doesn't work. Rabbi is right. The Omer, Eidus Shekei Arati. Discussing what's the case. The case is where one of the witnesses shows up and he's also again, same case, right? Witness 1 and 2 claim we raised $12,000 from Shimon, trying to make me liable for $2,000. Then one of the witnesses says, I'm sorry, I want to do tshuva. So instead of the Pesach, tremendous always change, freedom, depth. I lied. I'm not telling you, I didn't tell the truth. And therefore, again, and it sounds like Rabbi said, okay, we'll make him pay his share of $500. You know that doesn't it? Well, so the Gemara says, "Kol community believe, even should we get shit in the clothes or not?" Looks like something that works by testimony. The testimony really works is once you give your testimony, that's it. You are not believed to change your story. So this is really interesting. In other words, once you offer up your testimony in Beis Din, that's it. It's locked in. You do not believe you to change it. So how could a witness come along and say, I lied, and therefore make him liable to half of the $1,000? To which the U.S. Allah, by the way, I think is a very interesting. The Omer, Abdul is examining Beis Din clearly. You know, listen to this. What's the case? The case is where the witness one shows up and he says, you know what? Witness, me and witness two, we testified in a different case. We were made into Eidim Zomanim. We're going to be escaped from that Beis Din. So I'm here now in this Beis Din number 2 to declare that I am an Eid Zomanim. And therefore, again, I'm going to pay my portion. Simar says, well, it doesn't work. Simar says, Kima, Rabbi Akiva. This obviously doesn't go to Rabbi Akiva. So we just finished Rabbi Akiva on the bottom of Beis Din Day. It's why Rabbi Akiva ha'amar in Yerushalayim v'atzmo. In the beginning, that's what Rabbi Akiva holds. That what you can't pay as an Eid Zomanim based on your own remission. Why not? Eid Zomanim is a knas, and again, you can't pay a knas payment based on your own remission. So what's the case? So again, just to be clear, remember, we're just trying to figure out. So we just said in the name of God that an Eid Zomanim can pay his own portion. Based on his own admission, to be liable to his share. We're just trying to figure out what is that case. What is that case? So we must listen to this. Oh, so this is very interesting. What's the case? The case is right where witness one shows up. Witness one shows up in Beis Din 2. Okay? Witness one in Beis Din 2. And what does witness one say in Beis Din 2? He says, listen, Beis Din 2. Witness 2 and I testified in Beis Din 1, and we were found to be Eidim Zomanim, and Beis Din imposed the financial penalty on us. So we're liable to $1,000. Well, let's say something very interesting happens here. Even though we say that the reciprocal payment, right, is Eidim Zomanim is knas, once Beis Din passes the psak din, right, the verdict, once the verdict is delivered, and now Beis Din says witness 1 and 2 you tried $1,000, that is now a debt. Because it's a debt, therefore what? It's mammon. It's money. It's not knas. And it's like any other debt. That in other words, after the verdict is delivered, the witnesses 1 and 2 are Eidim Zomanim, and they're obligated to pay back even $1,000. So again, even though the process of Eidim Zomanim is a knas, but once Beis Din delivers its verdict, that is now mammon. That is a debt that they owe. If there's a debt, then you can pay it based on your own admission. So when witness 1 shows up in Beis Din 2, right, and says, listen, Witness 2 and I, we were about to be Eidim Zolman in Beis Din 1, and Beis Din 1 delivered the verdict. And we're chayiv to Ruben. We said, we did wrote up the verdict, we're chayiv to $1,000, that is a financial obligation. When witness 1 shows up in Beis Din 2 and says, I owe it, we believe it, and we let him pay his portion of $500 to Ruben. So the Gemara says, okay, it's interesting. What's fascinating about this? Who's chayiv in this case? Who's chayiv in this case? Witness 1. Who's not chayiv in this case? Witness 2. Why? Because witness 2 has a segment here. Witness 2 is like, oh, there it is. I might have thought that how can I obligate witness 1 to pay his share without obligating witness 2? How much money do we do? We look at 2 different things. Witness 1 is coming forward and saying he owes money. So what's that? When someone comes forward and says that they owe money, what's our approach to that? What's our approach? Okay, that's fine, cash or credit. You know, that's our approach. If you say you owe money, we'll take you at your word that you say you owe money. That's it. The fact that there's another witness involved in it, look, he's not saying anything. Okay? And your word, witness 1, your admission can't have an impact on witness number 2. So there was an interesting enough, if witness comes along, witness 1 comes along and says, we were made Eidim Zolman in another Beis Din, and that first Beis Din actually delivered the verdict, so made us chayiv as a debt $1,000, and I stand before you in Beis Din number 2, saying that I owe my portion. Beis Din 2 says, okay, pay up, no problem, we're happy to accept the payment. What's the implication of that on witness number 2? Nothing, because witness number 2 didn't say anything. Incredible. All right, let's say Mishnah. Second Mishnah, something smart is incredible. Me'idin anu v'sishponi shegirich is ishto, v'lo noslas ksuvas. So that's very interesting. So witness Ishmael, witness 1 and 2 shot. They say, we saw Ruben divorce his wife, right? Friday, Shabbos, right? In the 13th of Nisan, we saw him divorce his wife, and he did not pay her ksuba. We give her ksuba, okay. So what's now what happens? Now the Gemara says, now interestingly enough, you're found to be Eidim Zolman. Okay, so second set of witnesses show up in front of the first set of witnesses. You cannot have seen that on Friday. You were with us bloody Muhammad's, right? You were the whole day, the whole day. So you cannot have seen that we didn't divorce this wife. So now the question is, what did they pay in this scenario? So again, so obviously they were trying to make Ruben pay the ksuba. So let's just say the ksuba was worth $50,000. So they're trying to make Ruben pay the ksuba. Now here's the problem. You just say that the Eidim only have to pay $50,000. That doesn't make any sense. Why? So that's okay. It's possible we'll say that what? That it would have ended up now that Ruben would have ended up paying the ksuba anyway. Now why would he end up paying the ksuba anyway? It's two possibilities. Possibility one, they get divorced. Possibility 2, he dies and his estate has to pay it. So it's not like, see what I'm saying, like in a classic case we were saying before, right? When it's a shop and they say, it's 1 or 2, Ruben stole $1,000 from Shimon. So they're trying to make Ruben liable to $1,000 that he would not be liable to without their testimony. See, the halacha is reciprocal punishment to pay $1,000. In this case, they're trying to get Ruben to pay the ksuba. So right now, Ruben doesn't owe the ksuba. But it could be like that you owe the ksuba. Whereas there's so many different scenarios. Scenario 1 is that Rachel predeceases Ruben. If that's the case, there's no ksuba payment at everything. And therefore, based on their testimony, they'd be depriving him $50,000. Possibility 2 is that they get divorced. If they get divorced, you have to pay it anyway. The possibility 3 is that he predeceases her, in which case his estate would have to pay her. So Shai is in this case, what do the Eidim Zolman pay to Ruben? To which the Mishnah says, Omdim kama adamot elitim b'ksuvasa shozu, shemis'amala oliskarsha v'imesa yirashana bayla. So it's interesting. So essentially what we value this at is as like a ksuba future. Now, also you've seen this concept before, that a woman has a right to sell her ksuba. Right, so let's say Rachel wants to make money, so she decides to sell ksuba. Now, what happens when a woman sells her ksuba? What is she selling? She's selling a future option. What she's saying is, my ksuba is worth $50,000. Now, I'm willing to sell it to you with the possibility that we're going to get divorced. Right? Or my husband's going to die, and therefore I'll collect. But remember again, there's also the other possibility that what she predeceases him. If she predeceases him, what does the buyer get? Does it get zero? So therefore, when you sell a ksuba, the pashtos, you sell it at a steep discount, right? Because again, although there's the possibility of a payout, there is, right? Let's check into the shalom bayis thing first, right? There's a possibility of a payout, right? But Lamaisa, there's also the possibility that you get absolutely nothing. So the Gemara suggests that's the amount that we make Edom Zolomim. Now, was an interesting enough. The Gemara says, "Case on Shabbat." The Gemara says, "By the way, how do we assess this payment?" Someone up here is from the Baal. So this says ultimately again, we do it based on the husband. Always based on the husband. What this means is like this. So the husband also goes to the ksuba. Every husband, what's mishubed? What's mishubed? What is encumbered to the ksuba? From the husband, what is encumbered to the ksuba? Everything. Like I said, this is very important. Right? The ksuba encumbrance develops upon everything. Real property, movable property. That's why the ksuba we write. Appealing glima, that pasquale. Even the shirts on my back. Everything is encumbered to the ksuba. So this seems to indicate that if we look at the value of the property, if we look at the value of the property encumbered to the ksuba, right? Look at the value of the property encumbered to the ksuba, and that again. That is what the Indian would have deprived the husband of, and therefore that's what they have to pay. So what's the value of the property encumbered to the ksuba? Now local man said that's what they have to pay to the husband. But Nasra Oshia Amr no, the Isha. No, Nasra Oshia says really like what the Mishnah said. And Halakha Lamaisa, this is very interesting. You look at the family. How much would a person be willing to pay for the future right of the ksuba? Right? If we subtract that amount from the actual value of the ksuba, and that's the amount that Edom Zolim would have to pay. Right? So in other words, we'll say, here's the value of the ksuba, his value of the ksuba will call it $50,000. Then if she were to sell the ksuba, how much would she sell it for? Let's call that $20,000. We look at those two values, and the Edom Zolim are forced to pay the difference in those two values. The face value minus the future values, that's the amount ultimately again that they receive to deprive the husband of, and therefore Allah they have to pay that. I'm going to Papa says Biisha or Biksuba. So Allah says Halakha Lamaisa, we're going to go like that second approach. That will do a difference between the face value and the future, we'll call it the future value, right? The future's value of that ksuba, right? We pay that amount, but mostly here's the chap. Remember, ksuba doesn't necessarily include everything that a husband would be obligated to his wife for upon divorce. Right? There's other properties, there's, let's say, some barzal, let's say, other things like that. That does not come into the equation over here. The only thing Edom Zolim are obligated for is what's written in the ksuba itself. So Allah Kalamaisa, when the Gemara is stand up, is the witness is testified. We saw him in divorce Rachel, and he didn't pay her the ksuba. The halacha is they have to pay. What do they have to pay? Between the face value of the ksuba and the future's value of the ksuba, that difference is what they pay to the husband. Incredible. Mishnah. Me'ida Rabbi Shimon Shulchan Lechavei Elav Zuz Amenas Detail Mikandat Shloshim Yud. This is very interesting. When is the Shua? Let's say we testify that Reuben owes Shimon $1,000, and it's $1,000 that is due within 30 days. That's not like a 30 day debt itself is due within 30 days. So it's going to have a rule about it. Now Reuben himself says, no, we had that extra. I'm not sure. But it's interesting enough in this case, Reuben says, I owe Shimon $1,000. But it's not in 30 days, it's 10 years. It's 10 years. So now it turns out that this is Edom Zolim, right? So they lie, right? Second, so when they show up, they say, you can't know that Reuben owes Shimon $1,000 because of the day that the debt was made, you were with us. So this is interesting enough. What are the witnesses pure here? Because remember again, interestingly enough, in this case, everyone is agreeing that what? Reuben owes Shimon $1,000. What's the disagreement about? Not disagreement, but what we're lying about? The payment schedule. The Edom Zolim said that the loan was due in 30 days. Right? Reuben said the loan was due in 10 years, and Reuben was right that they lied. So what do? Very simple. The Gemara says, Omdu kama other modes of litain, the biyado elav zuz bein nosla mikan ba'adlan yom, bein nosla mikan ba'ad eser shanim. So it's very simple. Like, what do the Edom Zolim have to pay? They have to go like this. How much would a person pay? How much extra would a person be willing to pay to delay payment from 30 days to 10 years? And essentially, how much would I be? What is the value of being able to pay back at a much later date? Whatever, and there obviously is a value to that, right? There's absolutely a value to that. Again, that's how interest on loan works. Like the longer you can hold the money, so again, that represents something. So how much would a person get? What is the value of being able to hold on to a loan of $1,000 for 10 years versus 30 days? And that difference in value, that's what the Abel Zolman have to go ahead and pay to you. Gemara, I'm going to leave in shul. Amalvis Havel Asa Shalim, this is interesting days. Person goes ahead and lends his friend money for 10 years. 10-year loan. Shvi is Misham Taso. It's fascinating. Shvita will cancel the debt. The Gemara says, now here's what's fascinating. Nowadays, Yahabagat the Hashka lo Karir and Day Lorigos. Everyone said, what's the Shvita? So it says as follows. It says, when the Shvita year comes, Lorigos Esrei Egu, which means you can't approach your friend for repayment. Like you can't push him for repayment. And what's interestingly enough, on a 10-year loan, Ruvain is not pushing Shimon for repayment. Right? Why? It's not due now. Right? Let's assume they made the loan on the first year of the 7-year Shemitah cycle. So in the Shemitah year number 7, Ruvain's not approaching Shimon because the loan is not due. So even though again there's no element of Lorigos, nevertheless, like Avagat the Hashok Lorigos, so Asili Lorigos. Ultimately, again, this loan will come to Lorigos. So I'll say, when will it come to Lorigos? In year number 10, even though it's not actively collected now, essentially what we say is like this. Any loan that ultimately, again, will become collectible is subject to Shemitah cancellation. Which is fascinating. So what it sounds like this. Every loan, no matter how long the duration, right? You have a 30-year mortgage, it sounds like, again, you got that money from the Jew, sounds like Shemitah is going to cancel that, even though it's not coming due during the Shemitah year itself, because we apply the legal means any loan ultimately, again, that will be collectible is canceled out by the Shemitah year. Nothing goes out there. Nothing. About Kana. So Kana then brings out a concept of the Mishnah. Oldin, Kama, all this collectors, also what is Mishnah's case? Witness 1 or 2 short, and what did it say? They say, Ruvain borrowed $1,000 from Shimon, and he owes Shimon net. And then he back when? Within 30 days. Like Shimon claims, Ruvain claims, that I owe it back 10 years later. So I said, so what do you? We go ahead and we differentiate between the value that a person will pay to have a loan for 30 days versus 10 years. Well, second, that's what kind of. Anything come out of the months and we can be allergies be a go, then we can come back on you, then we can come back as strong. That's just point Mishnah. But that doesn't make any sense. The Amrit Shvius Misham Tasal. Now, if you hold that Shemitah cancels a loan, even if it's not due during the Shemitah year, then what can I say? When in reality, so the witnesses should have to pay you $4,000. Why? Because in the way the loan was structured, what was going to happen to Ruben's loan from Shimon? What was going to happen to it? It was going to be canceled by Shemitah. Meanwhile, when the witnesses say that it's due in 30 days, they're making the party liable for a loan. In other words, so in the way that they're claiming the loan happened, Ruben would be fired $1,000. But ultimately, again, in the way that it actually happened, Shemitah will actually cancel this debt. So what's going on here? Which the Gemara to be Amrit Shvius Misham Tasal. If you say that Shemitah cancels it, that even if the debt is not due during the Shemitah year, that means they were looking to deprive, they were looking to make Yidin liable for the $4,000 when Yidin would have been exempt from that because Shemitah would have canceled it. So much on the Rabbi, how come I'm asking what's the case over here? The Milva al Hamashko or the Moshe Shkaro Sophist. Says the case over here is that Halacha L'Maisa in this loan that Ruben borrowed from Shimon, they had a mashko. They had a mashko, they had collateral, or they handed over the debt to Beis Din, which is what we call Huzbal. So it's this is very important. In other words, it's interesting as an aside, Shemitah cancels debts, but Shemitah doesn't cancel all debts. So for example, there's two elements over here. If you have a loan that has a collateral, then the Shemitah doesn't cancel that. Why? Because the collateral makes it as if the loan has already been collected, right? That's what collateral is. Collateral is a form of repayment. So since there's an already existing form of repayment, if Allah says Shemitah does not cancel such a debt. The other thing that prevents Shemitah from canceling is what we call a prisbon. Rashi says over here, the last Rashi, first short line. And Rashi notes here, Shtarim said the days din, the prisbon, Shehiskin Velo, Shekasir Bo, Nasrani Lachem Kloni Kloni Hadarim, Shebemako Kloni, Shekol Chol Sheishli, She'alimanu Kol Zman She'erza. So this is exactly it. Right? This is exactly it. So we give a prisbon. So we're suggesting over here, this case is different because very well being that remember, Reuben is not arguing that he borrowed money from Shimon. Right? He did. Machlokas over here is about the duration. In Zomer is saying 30 days, right? And Reuben is saying 10 years. But even so, Shemitah would not have canceled this debt. Why not? Because this was a collateralized loan, or there was a prisbon. Okay, this time, Hamada al Hamashko. This is halacha. So if you go and you lend on collateral, or you make a prisbon, Shemitah does not cancel your debt. So fine. Well, so that's the first version of this discussion. Now the Ibn is very important because it's actually the halacha l'leisa. So we got the alternate version of this discussion. Any shvius mishantaso. So those are the alternate version of this is if you lend your friend money for 10 years, Shemitah does not cancel the debt. Okay? So it's the apagav the asili de lolibos, even though this loan will come to lolibos, which means even though one day this loan of course will become collectible. Hashtar miha lokarina de lolibos. Right now, it's not subject to lolibos. According to this version, and this is how you saw this thing, according to this version, Shemitah only cancels debts that are due now, lolibos now. But debts that are due later on down the road, Shemitah does not cancel. So that's what I'm going to do. Amra Kana, Ananami Tanina. We learn this as well. Omdin, Kama other months and weekend, you others just be a go. Then weekend, you can't buy Lamidio, then weekend, you can't buy as a shop. So it's a Mishnah, right? Witnesses shop, witnesses wanted to shop, and they say, you're going to borrow $1,000 from Shimon, and it's due within 30 days. You make it, not do it in 30 days, do it in 10 years. Do it in 10 years. So it says, what do we do? Now, it turns out the witnesses are 80 years old. So what do they have to pay? We assess the difference in value. How much would a person be willing to pay the delayed payment from 30 days to 10 years? That's the amount they have to pay. Now, the Amit Shis Mishampa. So, who do not buy Shmita? And again, Allah says, Shmita really cancels debts, even though we're in the Shmita year. But it turns out that Allah says, the way the loan was structured, Shmita would have canceled it. Basically, even Zomri, they would have to pay it, which means everybody should have to pay. The witnesses should have to pay the entire amount to repay. And the Rabbi says, no, I'm asking what's the case in here? The Nova al Hamashko. We're talking about, again, collateralized loan over no such colors of the basin, and one who does oppose both. This man, Hamada al Hamashko, the one runs with collateral, the Hamon such colors of the basin, or one does a prisbon, ain't mashmitin. Ultimately, again, it does not go ahead and Shemitah does not wipe out the debt. Incredible. So let's say, so halacha l'maisa, I just want to point out that the halacha l'maisa of the Mishnah remains the same, which is again, when this is 1 or 2 show up and they say, we're going to owe $1,000 due in 30 days. Shemai Reuben says back, I owe the money, but it's 10 years from now. Second set of witnesses show up and they say, first set of witnesses, you're with us. You're with us, you couldn't have seen the loan or anything else. So what's the halacha? What do the witnesses pay? They pay the value. How much would a person be ready to pay to delay payment from 30 days to 10 years? That's the amount that they have to pay. And the next step is what I say is a fascinating machor. Okay, so a couple of shmitas and Shmita, which we'll come back to. The machor that Shmita is, everyone agrees that Shmita cancels debt that are due during the Shmita year. Shaila does Shmita cancel debts that are due after the Shmita year. That is a machlokas. That's a machlokas. Everyone also agrees that Shmita doesn't cancel either collateralized loans or principal loans, right? The logic is the same. Ultimately, again, because those are already considered to be collected, right? Collateralized loan is collateral. Collateral is a source of repayment. And if I go for a nice, again, a collateralized loan is already considered to be as if it's been repaid, and if a Shemitah will not cancel it. Prisbon, again, we'll get into the answer Prisbon by itself. Good. Already we go to Amr Shmuel. Home of Chaveram. Person says to his friend, I'm going to ask Shor to Shmitini Shvius Mishanachas. So this is interesting. So let's say I loan you money to you. I say, I'm giving you a 7-year loan. I'm lending you money on the condition that Shemitah does not cancel this loan. So what's the halacha? What does Shmuel say? Shemitah Shemitah cancels the loan. I was never considered Shmuel. Master of Shkasibataro. Master of Shkasibataro. It's not about. Okay, so also it seems to be a simple rule. You can't make a condition which runs contrary to Torah law, and if you do so, your condition is batal. So to make a condition that Shemitah doesn't cancel a loan, when Shemitah cancels loans is essentially an irrelevant condition. Irrelevant condition, it says, 1 second. Listen to this. Let's say I sell you the object, right? I say to you, I'm selling you the object on the condition that you have no claim of owner on you, right? I'm not overcharge you. So I'm selling you this item, probably means I'm significantly overcharging. Right? But the man says I sell him the item on the condition that he has no claim of owner against it. So what's that? Rab Amar Yishla Lavariel, Shmuel Omer, Eina Allah Owner. So Rab says ultimately again, I have no owner. And Shmuel says I did, but 1 second. Right? Shmuel says I did. Shmuel just got finished saying that if I say, here's the loan, the condition that Shemitah does not cancel it, such a Tanai, such a condition is void. Why? Because you cannot make a condition which runs contrary to Torah law. So over here, there's a Torah law of no. How could I go ahead and give the transaction? You're saying that there's no law. Which verse is never very much to listen to this. Ha'ikmar Allah, Amarav Anai, Yidin Yevash Demi Yedishmua, Hatzkim is to you. Amanas Shek. Ilacha Alai Olah, Elo Olah, Allah Olah. Amanas She'im Ba'olah, Hari. Each one. It's going to say everything is how you sell it. If I sell you an object, right, and I say anything, I'm selling you this object on the condition that there is no owner. If it turns out that, let's say, I overcharged you by more than 6, so let's say, then there's no enough. In other words, you can't say, to say that there is no owner, that's a factual statement. See, there is owner or there's not owner. If there is owner, just because you said there's no owner, it doesn't matter. And also, you can't change realities. Like, realities are what they are. So therefore, if I want to announce again, I'm overcharging by more than 6, that is owner, therefore my statement is meaningless. If, however, I say to you the reader, I'm selling you this object on the condition that you have no claim of owner against me, that works. Why? Because then what is Ruben doing? Ruben is giving up a right. Right, when a transaction is more than a 6, and then ultimately again there is a right on the part of the purchaser to claim owner. You can create rights, you can't change reality. So here's this distinction. So when you say, I'm selling you this on the condition that there is no owner, if there is owner, there is owner. The fact that you say there is no owner, right, at the end of the day doesn't change reality. If I say reading, I'm selling you this object on the condition that in the Allah owner, you have no claim of owner, so reading says, okay, then reading is giving up his rights. Giving up your rights, giving up your claim you're allowed to do. How can I talk about this? I'm not sure if this will finish this. But the person says, right, I said, we're going to need this money on the condition that Shmita, I'm sorry, I will ask Shalom Kishmatini Bishvias, Ein Shvias Mishantasov. So ultimately, I say, so essentially, if right, I'm going to read that, I'm not Shalom Kishmatini Shvias. Shvias Mishantasov. So same thing. If I let you the money, say, I'm letting you know on the condition that Shmita will not cancel the debt. Right? So again, Shmita cancels the debt. Why? The Shmita, so you can't change Shmita. On the other hand, if I say I'm going ahead and letting you this money on the condition that you will not cancel the debt on Shmita, that works. Why? Because what's happening over here? Waiving is the right. So even as the borrower has the right to say, the loan will continue even past Shmita. I don't have the right or the ability to go and change the reality of how Shmita works. So we'll say, it's something like a distinction. When you make it tonight, you're trying to change reality, that does not work. It's no bottle. But when you make it tonight, that essentially allows the other person to yield their rights. If they choose to yield their rights, they have the ability to do so. So if he wants to yield the right of a forgiven debt, a forgiven debt, that's his right. If he wants to yield the right of a law, that's his right. But you can't change realities with your words. Incredible. Tana. So it says Tana. Amal bet. So, okay, let's say that is so. Let's point out, if you think about this, and just like that, like a societal way, I think that this is one of the concepts that is so lost on us, right? In other words, one of the things that we struggle with now, contemporary as a society, is this notion that you could say things, and just because you say it, realities change. Like whether that's in matters of gender, or it's like it doesn't work that way. Realities now again, a person has a right to do what they want with themselves. Right? As an individual, I say, yeah, I have a right to make decisions about myself, but I can't change realities. That's the realities that exist in this world. And just because you say something, you can't change it. You could change your personal circumstances, right? You could change you. You could forgive certain rights that you have, but you can't change realities with words. So again, to say Shemitah will not cancel that debt, that is a false statement. Shemitah cancels debt. To say there is no on this transaction, you can't say that. There is a on the transaction. But to say, I'm lending you this money on the condition that you will not exercise your Shemitah cancellation, okay, that works. To say that you will not exercise your own rights, that works. That works. Incredible. I do want to say, Tana, I'm not just for their stem. You know, actually, listen, I'm just going to use the last two. Several business today for clients and stuff. Like, these are like Babylon and stuff, right? Remember, so it's nothing, Babylon. So it's nothing. And so just a short idea as we go into that. You know, it struck me, and I'm very, very, very just very overwhelmed a little bit by this. Just a little overwhelmed by this Erev Shabbos. I'm all overwhelmed by the Erev Shabbos going into everything. Not overwhelmed like in a bad way. It's like, what's fascinating to me most is the prolongation of like the B'dikas comments. Right? It's fascinating, right? Because in other words, we did the B'dika last night, looking at barely this morning by whatever it is, like 11:32, but 27, right? But interestingly enough, right? But really, you could still clean your house today. Like in other words, no, it's actually nice. Like I can say I'm getting don't do that. But I have to finish everything up this morning. Like when I slept comments in our house, we didn't comments on Shabbos and look at the Kayim. Like in other words, I'm still doing all of this stuff. Through tomorrow morning, right? So tomorrow morning we'll finish the comments by 10:30, 10:22. Right? We call Kamira by 11:37. Good. Right? So it's just fascinating. Just the prolongation, right? The elongation of this concept. So today, what we get to this agenda of this year's membership is the B'dikas comments be upon the side. So so beautiful. There are no past things. We said last night, right? Last night we said Kol Kamira. Now the Kol Kamira last night is a Kol Kamira of Hamid you don't know. The Dark Moshe says that we say Kol Kamira of Lashon Aramis. We say it in Arabic, right? So in Ramon Shapalala, he says, why Lashon Aramis? That is the vernacular. The idea is you're supposed to say Kol Kamira in any language that you understand. That's why, again, if you don't understand Kol Kamira, but as he seen it, when you say Kol Kamira, if you don't understand it, so say English. So say any language that you understand. That's why the Ramon says Aramaic is the vernacular. The Berhudin comes from the Seder Hayom. And the Seder Hayom says, no, there's no reason to say it in Aramaic. Why? Because the Malachim don't speak Aramaic. And I don't want the Malachim to understand my Kol Kamira. So Seder says, what's the fact? Is incredible. Because what does Kol Kamira say? Kol Kamira says, like, any bread that I have, any punnets, I don't want it. It's holiness. It's like half your cat after that. It's like that's the deal. And the Malachim, if you say the Malachim bread, they say, it is sustenance. Bread is the staple of life. And look how dismissive these Jews are about their bread. They don't care about the sustenance you give them. They don't care about the lechem you give them. And it will incite the malachim to advocate against us on high. And therefore, again, we say called Kamir Arameh, the way that the malachim should understand it. Perhaps there's an additional idea also I say in Aramaic. I will say, I love to be best for this. This fuels us. Last night, today, it's funny we know there's already been already, but chametz is representative of the Yitzhak. And when we do the best chametz, what do we do? Yes, it's true, I'm looking for the chametz, the external chametz. But really what I'm doing is the search for external chametz is really just to be the catalyst for the search for internal chametz. That's really what I'm doing last night and today and for tomorrow. That's why we have this morning window. To look for internal chametz. What is the chametz that resides inside of my heart, inside of my life? What is the things that I just need to purge myself of? Or in other words, what the Vikas chametz and also the Gita chametz represents is the power of change. That I have the ability to get rid of the chametz from inside me. I have that ability. That is my life. That is my ability. And if there's one thing that man could do, that we could do, that malachim can't do, is what? Change. Malachim can't change. Malachim can't do that. And malachim can't wake up one day and say, you know what's crazy, but I'm going to do the best version of my angelic self. And malachim is what it is. There's no change, there's no transcendence, there's no evolution, there's nothing. There's nothing. The greatest part of being unique, the greatest part of being a human being is the ability to change. I think because chametz in its essence represents that power of change. That ability to find the inner chametz, the ability to get rid of it, and the ability to either become someone different, become someone better, or just move myself forward from that. That's the chat they say that as well. We don't say Kol Kamira, we say Kol Kamira Arameh. Right? Why? The malachim shouldn't understand it. Why should the malachim understand it? Because they don't want to create tension between myself and the malachim. Because if the malachim could see that I could change, and they can't, that creates kina. That creates jealousy between Eretz and Shemayim. So we say it in a language that they don't understand. Knowing well full well for ourselves that we possess the greatest koach in the world. The koach that even the malachim don't possess. The koach to change, the koach to get rid of our chametz, the koach to become someone even greater. However, we have a long, elongated window of the best chametz this year. Started last night, it goes through today, it goes through tomorrow morning. And we just want Hashem to be able to use this golden opportunity to, yes, get rid of all the external chametz. And also be courageous enough to go out and find the internal chametz and be able to do something so great that even the malachim can't accomplish it. So it's like good life Shabbos, I think it's Yom Tov. All right, everyone, Zoom. Shabbos, everyone. Good Shabbos, good Yom Tov. Great to see everyone.
I think I'm going to go B2. I took the shot. He does make fun of it. I think he's going to probably thinks two brothers that are mentally handicapped have the system down. And they were going to go somewhere else or something. Yeah, when you're lying and saying crazy shit, there's no way to make it make sense when you're trying. I can't sell it. Things are starting to go down. I'm saying it today. I would love to know what really happened. It's like if this is a real story, he's a nice guy. He wasn't molesting him. He's molesting him. I don't know.
Good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning. So thank you.
Answer this question.
Our annual Comic Con sponsor, taking the top of our job. Again, to the ownership and justice.
Times 2 is 8. Oh my God. 2 plus 2.
this year. As a this, the Besor corresponding by Yisrael. When the correspondence for the month of Nisan, Habari, with the Trevor Paul College, the celebration of Nisan birthdays of Kathy, his granddaughter for Esther, and the birth is in addition yesterday, birth of a grandson, T. and Jeremiah Pollock of Indianapolis, Indiana. Mazel Tov, which is not like this week, we have his mother for the night. Now this comes on his console, and he's supposed to suit this one of our children, and for these to be the month of the English with the child Israel, and the Avenishim descendant, memory of Papa and his mother, Sarah of Raina, Basia, Shua, Hashem, and that gave his spouses for today. Our masters, gratitude to Hashem for the bliss today in North Hashem, of baby boy born to Daniel and Rachel last night. That was the iron of good time. And on Zoom, not so nothing to Jericho. Lisa, Charlotte, his mother, and God, his phone, the put up with my sheet clothes. Good talk to my okay, what's that? And the question is, we should be giving him this afternoon, Hashem, we dedicate our day in this Christmas precious house. We spoke to North Hashem, bring them home. We show them the color of this Christmas, for these soldiers making it fun, allow them to be successful. The whole Maaseh, and come back to it, and we show them and the colors. So with that, let us begin. Check. Remember, we can memorize what a privilege it is to have finished the second set, hedging on the journey. Feels like we were doing some hedging for about 14 years. Right? But it was like the best 14 years of our life. It was just, I feel like it was 11 of those years. Right? But it was just absolutely incredible, especially beautiful. And how we took to the second month. It was very different. We could just tell by the sheer size of the pages. Very different, but Baruch Hashem. Great, so let's go. Keep that even Nasizon. Ultimately, again, how do Abram become Zolim? Now, again, we'll say we've had exposure to this topic extensively over the course of the second century. So remember, again, the Torah introduces us to this idea that if we just go right back, the goodness has come along. Let's get to that back in Israel. Very simply, right? Goodness has come along. Witness 1 and 2 come along and testify that we really killed Shimon. Okay? And you get in and you go through the testimony, and then a second set of witnesses show up. And they say to the first set of witnesses, you cannot have seen Reuben kill Shimon. Why? Because we know how you say, you're with us. You're with us. So interestingly enough, second set of witnesses do not say that Reuben didn't kill Shimon. Maybe Reuben did kill Shimon. What do the second set of witnesses say? What do they say? That the first set could not have seen what they are claiming to see. That's the picture over there. There's no way that you could actually claim that you saw what you actually saw because you were with us at that particular time. Okay? Then what's time of hope? So we'll say this one concept is going to serve as the cornerstone. What's time of hope? What's time of hope is that you have to go ahead and do the Abram that which they conspired to do to the descendants. So as a punishment, they wanted to seek to impose upon Reuben. In this case, again, it would be a death penalty. But they were accusing Reuben of going and killing Shimon. So whatever they were ready to go out and do to Reuben, that's ultimately, again, what we do to them. Now, if this is enough, the Sefer HaChinuch brings down, this is actually fascinating. So Sefer HaChinuch brings down, this is mitzvah, Tov, Tov, Dalet. Double Bob Dollar. So interestingly enough, listen to these words. When commenting on his mitzvah, the Sefer HaChinuch writes, "K'kasher kami Torah Torah Rishonim, lo yadanu ham baruch bazeh." Sefer HaChinuch says, not exactly sure what is the root of this halacha. But what is this? I understand that Abram Zolim have to be punished. I understand that. Right? When you do something wrong, there's a punishment for it. Is that right? Every action has a consequence. Every action has the way the world works. The Sefer HaChinuch says, I'm not exactly sure why there is this reciprocal punishment. It's fascinating. He says, we don't have these, I want to find out what's the number. What's the Sefer HaChinuch's entire, Sefer HaChinuch's entire book is left. So the right time that mitzvah, the right it says, so reason is the mitzvah. And he literally says, I don't have clarity on the reason for this particular mitzvah. He then goes on and offers a fascinating insight. He is a Rosh Hashanah mitzvah, Liyaser Kaish Asher Lo Ribo. So really what this is as far as this. Here's the goal, say because sometimes in life we have partial information. And it's interesting how our minds are able to construct an entire story from partial information. Like we do this all the time. I hear something, I see something, and I create an entire narrative around that little bit of information that I've seen. See if that connection is very dangerous. You gotta be dangerous, and therefore again, okay, doesn't want to do that. Also, the emes is a veiled. Hashem does not want us to testify about anything that we don't have explicit clarity on. This is fascinating. So therefore, HaKadosh essentially says, in order to go ahead and convince us, not to testify about something on which we don't have explicit clarity, is, by the way, whatever you're seeking to do to the defendant, just know if you're wrong. If you're wrong, or if you're lying for that matter, ultimately, again, it's going to come right back on you. Fascinating, but to be honest, it's even more striking about this explanation. Ultimately, again, this is understanding about this concept now. Not everybody understands. It's hard to clarity exactly what this means. But it's not going to show us how this is. The emotion only wants us to give testimony if we are explicitly clear. If there's any suffix involved in the testimony, the sake of which Hashem does not want me to give it. And then what's the husband of it is, the danger is the way we construct partial narratives, the way we construct complete narratives based on partial information. We do this with each other all the time. I see something, I hear something, I create an entire story. How many times does it happen after I create the entire story, I find out what? The story's wrong. The story's wrong. Why? Because I was offering you incomplete information. So it's the same thing. That's what's important with you ultimately again. I think there's another piece as well. That this idea of reciprocal punishment is that the Rebbe Shalom wants us to understand the achliyus that we have together. If you're going to go ahead and show up and give testimony, that means you are willing to change someone else's life. If you're willing to change someone else's life, you better have skin in the game as well. Because if you're going to stand on the sidelines and then offer information, right, that could dramatically change the course of a person's existence, you can't do that unless you have skin in the game. If you want to go ahead and do something that's going to impact someone else, you need to ultimately, again, be involved in that scenario as well. And interestingly enough, in that way, this is also, I think, a beautiful bridge between the end of Sanhedrin and the beginning of Sanhedrin. When they say, what can we do at the end of Sanhedrin? We saw again, the Gemara says, Tzaddik b'Bali Olam, Tova Bali Olam. Tzaddik is the Olam. Who comes to the Olam? Who do you quote? Who is the example of this? Noah. And again, Noah was one of the first people who we saw was concerned about the other. Noah created a sense of empathy about the other. Noah constructed the farming tools. Noah understood that citrus means caring about the other. A system of testimony only works as there's a sense of responsibility one for the other. If you can give testimony and just like walk away, if you're telling the truth, great. And if you're lying, whatever, then ultimately there's no shared sense of achliyus for the life or for the plight of the other. Even Zohar says, we have been this together. We have everything together. Giving the testimony about someone, you need to feel the achliyus of the impact that your words may have on the life of the other. Incredible response. Okay, Mishnah. Kids are Ibn Zoli. So how do witnesses become Ibn Zoli? How does it work? So maybe you know this term should be Chalitza. Shua said he's a fascinating case. So what happens? We go witness a Shua, right? So we'll just call them 1 and 2. Witness a Shua, and they say about the color Ruvain. Now, Ruvain, as far as we know, is a color. Right? So he's been calling, he's been looking, he's been getting Rishon, right? All this stuff. Then what happens? Witnesses show up and they say, no, Reuben's not a Torah. Instead, what? Instead, Reuben's father marries a Grusha or a Chalisa. Right? He married a divorcee. Now, Torah is not allowed to marry a divorcee. If a guy marries a divorcee, then what's the halacha? The offspring is what's called a Cholo. Follow, again, follow still is Kasher Yid, he's still Kasher Jew, but he is precluded from doing the Avodah. So now, Reuben has been operating his whole life as a Kohen. Witnesses show up and they say, Reuben, you're not a Kohen, because your father married a Grusha, and therefore you are Ben Kedusha Ben Chavitza. So it says, now what happens? It turns out, second set of witnesses show up, they say witnesses 1 and 2, hey, guys, how can you testify about this? Because you say you're at the Chatzor. You're at the Chatzor of Reuben's father, but Reuben's father married a Grusha. You weren't at the Chatzor. You're at the Chatzor. And first of all, you weren't invited. And that's not right, right? So, second of all, you were with us on that day at a different location. So what's halacha? Ein Omen, Yasa Zeben Grusha Ben Chalitza Tachta, and the word Rabbi. So let's say, so again, there's a lot of issues with these guys this Mishnah. So the Mishnah begins to illustrate the concept of reciprocal punishment, but yet it begins with the case of non-reciprocal punishment. So we'll say, so, I know, you can't so sure about these issues, you know, because everybody needs to learn. So let's say, you might say like this. So then, I'm sorry. So like this, Mishnah like this. So if our witnesses show up and they say, we testify about Reuben as a Ben Yusha and Chalitza, second set of witnesses show up, they say, essentially, again, maybe listen, the whole topic of these is the second set of witnesses are not weighing in on the legal dispute. They're not weighing in on the Din Torah. All you're saying is, first set of witnesses, you can't be testifying about what you're testifying to because you were with us at the time of the event. So therefore, you're lying. So they show up. Second set of witnesses say, you have no idea if Reuben was a Ben Yusha or Chalitza. Because again, you weren't there. You weren't at the Chatzor. You don't know if the father married a Grusha or not. So let's say, so in this case, the Mishnah says, so it's okay. This is for the punishment. What should we do? We should make the Eidim into Chamalim. Obviously, this will only work if the Eidim are Kohanim, right? But let's say, again, if it's Eidim about making a Chalak, which the Mishnah says, no, we don't do that. We'll see why we don't do that. We don't do that. We do not visit the punishment upon them. In this case, instead, what do? We give them office. Give them up, because we give them lashes. Okay. Good. So these words are just five. That's case number 1. Case number 1 in the Mishnah. Next. The either of each one should carry the dollars. Just in case. Witnesses 1 or 2 show up and say, hey, we saw Reuben accidentally kill Shimon. Alright, so let's not look up. If Reuben accidentally kills Shimon, there's a husband cabbage. Like Reuben has to go through the look up. So we saw, right? They testified that on Thursday, talked of Nisan, we saw Reuben kill Shimon. Second set of witnesses show up and they say, I'm sorry, there's no you could have seen that. Cause on the phone, but we saw you were with us somewhere else. So it turns out that the first set of witnesses are 80 years old. So what's the halachot? The verses 8 only you can get hacked on Alalonka Abba. Ultimately, again, you do not send the second set of witnesses to Dallas. Rather, what happens? They get Malchus. So we'll say, so a number of interesting facts come out of this Mishnah. Number 1, apparently we do not apply the Jewish reciprocity to every situation only. That's number 1. And number 2, in cases where we do not apply the concept of reciprocity, ultimately, again, we go ahead and impose Malchus upon them. Lashes upon them. Okay, those are the 2 takeaways from the Mishnah. Now let's find out what's in the Mishnah. So the Gemara says, the Mishnah, first of all, the Mishnah itself doesn't read well. Right? Why not? How does the Mishnah read? How do Eidim become Zolim? So what do you expect the Mishnah to say? What does the Mishnah to say? How the Eidim become Zolim? Yet remember, what does the Mishnah talk about? Cases where the Eidim aren't Zolim. So the Gemara says just the flip doesn't work. Instead, it should have said, how ultimately, again, it should have said, how do witnesses not become Zolim? That's what I should have seen in this scenario. To which we also, but furthermore, Zod may be turning the camera, that which we learned later on, about Amulahem, Hey Atam Mu'idim. So remember what I said, we see this later on in the next Mishnah. That's actually not the next Mishnah, it's the Mishnah on Kayla Dalit. There's a couple of Mishnahs in between. So the next Mishnah, we'll see explicitly Amulahem. So the next Mishnah on Dalit actually goes through the process of how Eidim become Zolim. How do they become Zolim? first set of witnesses testified to something, right? One or two testified, and then the second set of witnesses showed up and they said, this is what they say. On the line, they say to the first set of witnesses, hey, Atzam, how can you be testifying about what you're testifying to? Shahari Ba'al Akan Haisim Imanu Imafon Plani, because on the day that you're testifying, you were with us in a specific place. So what's the halacha? How Ibn Zonin. These are Ibn Zonin. So again, the Mishnah Monodalet explicitly discusses how Ibn Zonin work. So what's going on over there? Tonight, so that's the question. The question is, why does the Mishnah say, Hates that I Ibn Nas is Zonin? How do witnesses become Zonin? When the Mishnah talks about cases of where we don't commit the Ibn Zonin. And again, we're going to understand, but we're not visiting the cyclical punishment of Hamas. What's going on over here? Which the Gemara said, as kind of Hassan type. Where's there we go? The Gemara says, the Mishnah reading itself to Sanhedrin. So it said, no one wants to read Sanhedrin. No one wants to read Sanhedrin. You want to read Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin is incredible. The Gemara says, kind of Hassan type. So the Tans actually continue a conversation which was begun in the Sefer Sanhedrin. What happens in Sanhedrin? Sanhedrin says, call it Zimmerman, Bakim no Semisis. Remember this? Zimmerman, Bas Kohen. Remember how the Chinese done in this case? That if a Bas Kohen who is a Yeshua commits adultery. Right? A Bas Kohen Yeshua commits adultery. So what's the halacha? Is a unique punishment for her of Sreifa. Sreifa. Right? Now that is opposed to general adultery, which is punishable by killing. She gets Sreifa. So the answer is as follows. Kalashon Mekinosis in general, Ibn Zonin, if they testify as someone is liable to death and they're found to be liars, that Ibn Zonin, they will get whatever death penalty they were seeking to impose upon the defendant. Courts, Zonin Baskar Bala. The exception to this rule is if they're testifying about a Bas Kohen who went ahead and has committed a Yeshua who committed adultery. She'im Magdilim La'osa Misa, Ella Misa Akaras. They don't get something that penalty because they don't get Sreifa. Instead, they get people look at Rashi, the Misa, which puts Zonin Bas Kohen. Rashi says Yeshua. So if a Bas Kohen Yeshua commits adultery, Sha'apat Mishon is Magdilim Sreifa. So even though again, in her testimony, she was sentenced to death. He was straight from the Imbala, the straight off. I would become to shout inches ish. That Solomon, Zorin, Mashkin, Lisa, Shaiba, Sabor, the syntax of Zorin, Lansas, Loaki, Along the Apostle. Okay, so let's say, so this is bad luck. So again, normally, a Bas Kohen Yeshua who commits adultery is punished by Sreifa. Now, interestingly enough, an adulterer, right, the man who commits adultery doesn't get Sreifa, he gets penance. If witnesses testified about against the Bas Kohen and her adulterer, and they're found to be Ibn Zonin, what's that penalty to do with? After all, again, they were seeking to impose Sreifa upon her. But again, Zera Sakasi, because it teaches us only she gets Sreifa, no one else gets Sreifa. Not the adulterer, right, and not the Ibn Zonin. So that's where, so therefore, we're picking up from that Mishnah in Sanhedrin. Now, our Mishnah picks up from there. Once again, you know, by the way, sometimes Mishnahs work this way, right? Mishnahs are a lot like life, right? A lot like life. They're not necessarily linear, meaning that a Mishnahs don't have to follow one after the other. So you can have a Mishnah in here, meaning a Mathis that is picking up from somewhere like in the middle of Sanhedrin. Sometimes it looks like it's a tremendous metaphor, right? We'd like to think, we'd like to do is just on a straight path. This is going to happen, this is going to happen. Everything is sequential, everything is orderly, everything is perfect. But as we go along, we recognize that's not the way it happens at all. There's plenty of bumps, plenty of turbulence, plenty of detours. And such is the nature of life. The beautiful part is the same way that Mishnahs at the end of the day come together, that at the end of the chapter, or at the end of Shas, everything comes together. It's the same way it works in life as well. Just got to be a little bit more about it. For 7.5 years, or multiple cycles, whatever it might be. Shas comes together, Mishnahs comes together, life comes together as well at some point in time. Maybe the Mishnahs lined up the way you wanted it to, maybe not exactly. Same thing in life. Life often all comes together. Sometimes exactly the way you anticipated you wanted. Sometimes you have different things, but some way, somehow, the beautiful picture always becomes intact. parents. Therefore, again, our Mishnah in the Sefes Matos is picking up ultimately again from the Sefes Sanhedrin. So Sanhedrin spoke about generate Ascoli. And then sometimes when you even like that myself, even like that's funny about Ascoli, she gets a straight ball. If it turns out that they're eating Zomanim, they're not getting straight, but they're getting Chenek. And now comes our Mishnah. So now watch this. So go back for just a second. Sorry. Zome. Call out Zomanim. Makdim Nosim. General halacha is all Zomanim are going to get the same death penalty as the person that testifying against. Courts. Zomanim bas clean bar. Shein Makdim Nosim is elements of Paris. Except for witnesses testified by Bascoli, because they're going to get a death penalty, but not the same death penalty. She's going to get shofar, they're going to get Chenek. Now, our Mishnah continues on that theme. The Yesh even Zomanim Acheras. Then there's so. Essentially, we're going through categories of Eidim Zomanim. Category one of Eidim Zomanim is that halacha l'maisa, they get the exact reciprocal punishment. Category 2 is they get the same type of punishment, but not exactly the same punishment. For example, Zomanim Bascoli, going to get a death penalty, but what? Not the same death penalty. And then there's the third category of Eidim Zomanim who what? Not get the same reciprocal punishment at all, but rather they get malchus. That's our Mishnah. Is Eidim Zomanim Achiv she'in osim b'hem din hazama ha'ikar ela malchus ha'bal. And so there's another category of Eidim Zomanim. Category 3 of Eidim Zomanim, where they will get a punishment, but it's not reciprocal. Instead, what are they getting? They're getting malchus. So what's the example of this? Well, what's the example of Eidim Zomanim? To get a punishment, but it's not a reciprocal punishment. Instead, it's just quote-unquote. It's just quote-unquote malchus. Kitzad me'idin on a ish prone sheben gusha ben chalisa. We testify the Mishnah. We testify about a person named ben gusha ben chalisa. So what's that level? So the Gemara says, "Ein omer yasser zeh ben gusha ben chalisa." So we don't say make the agent into a better ritual. So that what we say, keep them off this. So what says this is incredible. These are facts again. And remember, over the years, if you can take notes to someone, record the agent of those, so important. Because again, you have to remember everything. We can get something away from us. So 3 categories of agents only. Category 1, agent receive exact reciprocal punishment. Category 2, they receive the same type of punishment, but not exactly the same punishment. Really only one case like that, which is Zomanim Bascoli. Like I said, by last point, committing adultery, she gets hit and they get Chenek. And then category 2 Eidim Zomanim, where they get a punishment, but it's not reciprocal at all. Right? And what's that? That's our Mishnah. That's Ben Gusha Ben Chalitza. That's jealous. If it turns out that the Eidim Zomanim are just going to get the malchus and not gender. That's not just. They get malchus and not a different kind of punishment. Incredible. So everyone says, how do you know? And where do you know this? Someone say, how do you know that when witnesses testify, that let's say Ruben, right? Because Ruben is a challah. He's a Ben Gusha, he's the son of a divorcee. So the Mishnah says we do not make them into a Ben Gusha. Assuming that they're Kohanim, we don't make them into a Ben Gusha. How do you know that? Well, if the witnesses are Kohanim, make them Kohanim. Make them Kohanim before they are Kohanim. Right? Why not Kohanim do that? So you know, it's not even when you go to a Kohanim meeting. I'm going to show you very interesting. I'm going to show you some of the no kashas among the low Rizaro. Wow. So as I say, the halacha is because that's successful in the witness as he conspires